Hello, welcome to this event celebrating 45 years of Superman the movie. We have some pre-recorded interviews with cast and crew shortly. First of all, I have some written comments to read out from those that weren't able to participate in this event, but had been interviewed via email for previous things that I've done. I did an event back in 2018 for the 40th anniversary of Superman the movie. And this was a small event I produced a little program for, and this was a family and friends event. And some of the Superman movie casts were extremely generous and completed some questions I sent them via email, and I'm just going to read out some selected comments from those. So Jeff East sent the following for me. So first of all, I asked him what made you want to become an actor and what was your first big break. Jeff said, I first got into acting as a 5-year-old when my older sister and brother wanted to do a neighborhood show featuring all the talents of the local kids, and my sister and I sang You Must Have Been a Beautiful Baby. I was then encouraged to get into children's theatre, which I did until I was 14. That year of 1972, I was picked up by Reader's Digest, a United Artist, to play the role of Huck Finn in the big screen version Tom Sawyer, 1973. How would you win the role of young Clark Kent in Superman the movie? In 1977, Richard Donner asked me to play the role of young Clark Kent in Superman after seeing me in the film The Hazing, aka The Curious Case of the Campus Corpse. That was 77. What was it like to work on Superman? I spent the entire year working all over the world on that film. It was an eye-opening and fun experience, with long hours of special effects and stunt work. They were all experimenting with many wire and special flying rigs and optics. They had never done any of them before, and it was a long endurance. I enjoyed the crew and cast, however, and really enjoyed working with English filmmakers. What are your memories of working with the Superman cast and crew? Richard Donner was a great leader and a wonderful director, a large personality, and he had a big love of the story and Superman comics. I wanted it to be honest and with heart. I loved working with Donner. Chris Reeve and I spent the first 2 months of filming getting to understand each other. So we had lunch and dinner, we played chess in his trailer, and we would work out together. It helped him and me as well. Chris was truly Superman, and no one can match that performance. He was a very intelligent and talented world-class pianist and a great chess player. Tom Mankiewicz was a marvelously funny gentleman to spend time with, very old-school Hollywood and easy to talk to. Phyllis Thaxter and Glenn Ford were classy and very professional to work with. I really connected to them both. The relationship between director Richard Donner and the Soulkinds became increasingly strained as time went by. Was this something you were aware of, and what were your impressions of the Soulkinds? I really didn't get too involved with the Soulkind fiasco until the end, when I shot the Fortress of Solitude scenes at Pinewood in October 77, when Richard Lester had taken over the helm and directed me in a few scenes. But Donner's presence was still felt. The Fortress scenes took 2 months to shoot because 1 month was the first exterior scenes, the creation, and then the interior scenes, the Brando revelations. Very many hours going back and forth up the ice. I then asked, was the plan to always revoice your performance? And if so, how did this knowledge change the way you delivered your performance? I had no knowledge of being dubbed or looped by Chris until the premiere of the film, and I was disturbed and shocked. But I felt Chris at least matched my performance with his voice. I'm not happy that they did it without asking or revealing it, but they did. We leave it at that. What were your favourite scenes to work on, and do you have any scenes that you did not enjoy? I was not happy with the train sequence because it tore my thigh muscles and strained my shin muscles, so I was in pain for most of the shoot in Canada. I even almost got hit by the oncoming train. Fortunately, my stunt coordinator, Richard Hackman, saved me from that. Did the success of Superman the movie take you by surprise? I was not surprised by the success of the film, but I was surprised by how many films I was asked to and did thereafter. It's very thrilling to be recognised as being a part of an iconic film like Superman, and I'm very excited to be doing some events later this fall and winter celebrating. Apart from Superman, what was your favourite project to have worked on? I was very fortunate to be part of Tom Sawyer, a great first experience. I was also very proud of the day after the nuclear Holocaust film, 83, working in Israel on Mary and Joseph, A Story of Faith, 79, was spiritual. And having my own production company is a real thrill. Best regards, Jeff East. Next, I have some comments from actress Valerie Perrine. I asked her, what made you decide to become an actress and what was your first big break? I had been a Las Vegas showgirl for 8 years. I left Vegas and ended up in Hollywood. I was at a girlfriend's small dinner party and an agent heard me talking on the phone. I was being very cute and funny. He asked my girlfriend who I was. She said, that's Valerie. He approached me and asked if I was an actress. I said no. He asked if I had any photos. I only had topless ones from Vegas. He took one to the head of casting of Universal Studios. They were looking for someone to play Montana Wildhack in Slaughterhouse 5, 72. They wanted girls to wear a two-piece bathing suit for the audition. I didn't have one, so I wore a Vegas piece that was topless. I was the most natural girl. I was used to having my breasts out. That's what got me the part. What was it like working on Superman and the fact that you were shooting 2 films simultaneously? Did this add to the complexity of the shoot from your point of view? It was like any other shoot. We would just shoot all the scenes that were to be shot on whatever set. When that was done, we would move on to the next set or location. They were all fun. You have to remember shooting a film takes a lot of time and there's a lot of waiting around. I can't remember anything standing out. I can't remember how long I shot for. It was a great experience. Everyone gave 100%. My memories of the premieres are all blended together. It was a big press tour. What are your memories of working with director Richard Donner? Dick Donner is a genius. He's one of the most talented directors that ever worked in the business. I don't have any one particular memory. We had a lot of fun when we shot in Canada. He's a lovely, sweet man. You have fantastic chemistry with Gene Hackman and Ed Beatty. What were they like to work with? Fabulous. Gene is one of the greatest actors of the cinema. What he brought to the character of Lex was amazing. He defined the role. I loved working with him. Ned is a fantastic actor as well. What he did with Otis was superb. He was very funny to work with and very professional at the same time. How much input did you have in the development of your character? I think I really found her doing the hair and makeup tests, but the wardrobe was key. Once I have the wardrobe, I find the character. Yvonne Blake, who recently passed away, designed those gorgeous costumes. I wore whatever she and Dick decided for the scene. To tie in with the release of Superman the movie, you posed for Playboy magazine. Was this a positive experience? I had already posed for Playboy a couple of times before, once for Slaughterhouse 5 and with Lenny, set night as 1974. So it wasn't a new thing for me, and plus I was also very comfortable being topless from my Vegas days. And I was the first nude on American television for the PBS television play Steam Bath, 1973. Playboy was just more publicity for the film. What are your memories of working with Christopher Reeve? He was a very sweet young man. He was very serious and professional. He knew how great this opportunity was and he gave it his all. And it showed. He became Superman. In 2006, Rich Donner's cut of Superman 2 was released. What is your opinion of the Donner cut? It's the way it should have been. Dick's vision. Did the success of the film did the success of Superman the movie take you by surprise? I think we all knew it was going to be something special. The magic was there in every aspect. What's the positive and negatives of being associated with a movie franchise for this length of time? And did you ever think that people would still be interested in your role of Eve Tessmacher? I don't think there's anything negative about being associated with a piece of cinematic history. That film was the first superhero film. It set the standard which everything that came after it is judged. It made me believe a man could fly. I'm very happy that people still love Miss Tessmacher. She will always be the first person to save Superman and kiss him. Do you have any memories of working on What Women Want 2000 with Mel Gibson? It was a great film with a lot of talent in front and behind the camera. Mel was great, a class act. You fall in love with him as soon as you meet him. Apart from Miss Testmarker, what is the role you have been most proud to have played in your career and why? Hot Honey Harlow in Lenny. I was nominated for an Oscar. I won Cannes, the BAFTA, and the New York Film Critics Award. I got to work with Dustin Hoffman, one of the true greats of the acting world, and I was directed by Bob Fosse, a true genius of filmmaking. He said I was the most talented actress he had ever worked with. Because of him, I became a movie star. We had so much fun making that film. So just going to finish off with some comments from actor Jack O'Halloran. You began your career as a heavyweight boxer. How did this come about? I was going to play professional football first. Then Muhammad Ali won the title, and I said to my friends, I can beat him. And the next thing, I was in the gym training to fight. Why did you decide to become an actor, and what was your first acting role? Hollywood chased me. For several years, they offered me roles, and I kept saying no. Then when I retired from boxing, they offered me Farewell, My Lovely, 1975, starring Robert Mitchum, playing Moose Malley, my favourite role, and my career was underway. How did the role of Non in the Superman films come about? I was doing a film called March or Die, 77, with Gene Hackman, when they offered me Superman. I liked the script and the character of Non. What was it like working on Superman? Was it challenging because of the technical complexities of the flying sequences and special effects? It was a great learning experience as we set so many standards. We did things never done before and it came off very well. Just a lot of hard work that was very rewarding. It was brilliant. Marlon Brando was a brilliant actor, as was Terry Stamp and Sarah Douglas. A great bond was formed. Absolute brilliant chemistry with Terence and Sarah, and 40 years later, we still have a firm friendship. Margot Kidder was a great person to work with and a great friend. She will truly be missed in my life. Christopher Reeve was young, and Superman was his first acting role. There will never be another Superman or Clark Kent like him. He did the character so well. What are your memories of working with director Donner and the cast? Brilliant. The man is a great director. It was truly an honor and a pleasure working for him. Tom Mankiewicz was also brilliant to work with, one of the nicest people you ever met. Gene was great to work with. We had done back-to-back films together, so we knew each other well. Superman 1 and 2 originally shot simultaneously. Did this add to the complexity of the shoot? No, we had I had a lot of fun on both films. I enjoyed it all as it was terrific to do this type of film. We worked almost 3 years in total. I have so many treasured memories. The premieres were a lot of fun. They made a bad mistake getting rid of Donner, a very bad mistake, which was really unfair for the Superman fan base. Richard Lester, let's just say he was no Richard Donner. Lester was a far cry from Donner, like night and day. When Lester took over, we had already shot most of the scenes with Hackman, thank God, because Hackman refused to work with Lester. I prefer the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2, much better than the Lester cut for sure. Did the success of Superman the movie take you by surprise? We knew it was a hit just by the things you were doing. All the excitement in the dailies were bringing to people, the buzz was amazing. It's amazing that one generation after another embraces the films and the buzz just gets stronger. People look at these films as benchmarks, better than anything being done today. Every screening is packed and people just keep cheering the film. Best, Jack. So I hope you enjoyed those comments. And now I hope you enjoy the recorded Zoom interviews. Thank you. Hi, John.
Hello.
Hi, John. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm very good. Good. Thank you very much. You having a nice week?
So far, so good. Weather could be better.
Yes, it could.
Other than that, it's fine.
Yeah, good. Well, thanks for wanting to talk to me about Superman for my Superman event. It's most kind of you. So the first thing I think my viewers might want to know, John, is what the difference is, certainly back in 77, 78, between special effects and visual effects. It might be handy perhaps for them to know that to begin with.
Yeah, the main difference between special effects and visual effects, I mean, in fact, it hasn't changed much in the years since Superman. But we were called on, obviously, to do an awful lot more in-camera effects back in those days. A lot of directors these days tend to, I think, fall too readily onto the CGI world, which I think if you only have to look at the sort of classic Richard Donner first Superman 1 and what we did in that and how we did it and how it compares to the more recent Superman films, which are laden with CGI, and I think it's lost a lot of the reality because the more modern ones tend to look more like an animated film than a real film or a real story. But that I think applies across the board to all movies these days, which is why I don't go to cinema as much as I used to. But I'd worked with Richard Donner before on The Omen. And as soon as he came over to start Superman, he called me and we had a chat at Shepperton, and he asked me if I'd do it or work on the film. The film had already been trying to get off the ground for some time with the Salkins, Pierre Spengler, and they had a different director, and they'd already taken on Colin Chilvers and Les Bowie. So Dick was fairly adamant that he wanted me to be involved as well. So, excuse me. Okay. So after talking to Dick and the producers, what I'd sort of settled on was that I would look after all of the filming in America and Canada, which was quite a big chunk of the film. And consequently, I got involved in all the flying stuff really before they, settled on the other ways of flying Superman. And, always when I went on the stage to talk to Dick, when they were filming at Shepperton and Pinewood before I went off to the States, I'd always sort of get roped in, here, can you help with this or can you help with that? To the point that I even ended up sitting under the camera with Dick one afternoon, holding the, I think they called them idiot boards, but the speech boards for Marlon Brando, so that Dick and I would be sliding the boards along underneath the lens so that Brando's eyes were fixed on one point and he didn't have to follow the lines when he read them. Interesting times. But I mean, it was great to work with Dick again, and he remains my favorite director of all time.
So in terms of, I take it he had a lot of time for the cast and the crew, and he was very relatable.
Dick was extraordinary. He had a booming voice, but having said that, I never ever heard him shout or lose his temper at anybody.
Mm.
He was great fun on the set. He enjoyed to laugh as much as anybody else, and he brought a great camaraderie to the film. And a lot of us felt we were there for him. So much so that when we were filming in Canada, I think we'd only just started up in Calgary, and it was, or everybody was told that Dick Lester was coming on as a producer, and quite naturally everybody thought that the Salkinds were possibly bringing him in to take over from Dick Donner. And what was difficult for me was I'd done several films with Dick Lester, so I knew him very well, and he was, equally lovely to work with. But I can remember saying to Dick, if you go, we're coming with you, because I felt he needed a lot of support at the time. But it obviously never came to that on number one. It happened in between 1 and 2.
Because of course you were shooting number 1 and number 2 simultaneously.
We were at that point, yeah. I mean, we did a lot of the stuff for the second movie, both in New York and in Calgary. And it was interesting stuff, trying to find ways for Superman to run by the train and run off into the cornfields and kick footballs half a mile. It was challenging, and of course Dick loved it, and used to say to me, well, look, go off and take a camera and shoot some tests and see what you can come up with. We enjoyed doing it, and had a lot of fun along the way.
What was the hardest element of the film from your point of view that you were that took back?
Looking back, I mean, there were so many things, but probably the one thing that went right through the movie was Superman flying, and trying to get the reality into that. And I had several scenes where we had to fly Superman in New York. One was the scene, I think we shot it in 55th Street, where he comes down the front of the bank and lands and then takes off again. And, we did that for real with a crane and wires. And, again, in those days, you couldn't rely on CGI to paint the wires out. So we had to keep the wires very thin. We were using piano wire back at that time, which I was never really comfortable with, although it was supposedly the strongest wire out there. We eventually, of course, with CGI, moved on to steel cables, because we could use a thicker cable, because the CGI guys could paint them out for us. But back then I'd have to work with the cameraman to literally paint them out to camera and dapple them, and we had all sorts of tricks. But I can remember very clearly in that New York scene, they said they wanted to see somebody up in the position where Superman was going to start to fly down from for lighting for the lovely Jeff Unsworth. And I don't know why we didn't have a stuntman there that night, but it ended up with me having to put the harness on and go up there and hang there for an hour while they lit the scene. And I can remember keep looking at the wires and the harness that I had on and thinking, gosh, the actors have to do this, and it is a bit daunting when you're 50 feet off the ground hanging on two thin wires. But having said that, Christopher Reeve was brilliant from day one. I mean, is and always shall remain Superman in my eyes.
Oh yeah. I think there's been some good people to play Superman since, but I don't think anybody quite will get to the element that the level that Christopher Reeve brought to the role. And you say tremendous bravery to be on those thin wires. It's all things that are kind of new to this production. It's not like it's been 10, 15 years of other films that tried and tested. This is new for Superman, isn't it?
Well, yeah, I mean, we'd flown people on wires, for years, for 4 movies. And there was Kirby's Flying Wire about, and there were a few companies that did a lot of theatrical, stage stuff like Peter Pan. But it had all on the movies I'd worked on and the ones I'd worked on with my father before that. The flying people on wires always came under the remit of the special effects. So, it was quite natural for me to do it. But, we did that scene. We also did the scene in Brooklyn where Superman rescues the cat out of the tree.
Oh, yeah.
And, again, that was all flying. We had a crane and a crane driver who I think I commented at the time had a touch like a midwife because he could control the crane so smoothly, which is really, part of the art of that is starting and stopping and keeping everything really smooth. So you don't get wobbles and shakes and different things. But yeah, I mean, that was probably, I say, one of the trickiest things throughout the film. But then, looking back, there were lots of others. There was the car crash with Larry Hagman and forgotten the actress's name.
Valerie Perrine.
Yeah, Valerie Perrine. But we did all sorts of strange things, like the Superman running off into the cornfields. I got a track motorbike, built 2 footplates on the back of it, and then I would sit on the motorbike and drive it. Young Superman would stand on the footplates on the back, strapped to me with a harness, and I'd have 2 sandbags full of Fuller's Earth on the petrol tank. And then I'd drive off through the cornfields. I was crouched down very low over the bike. So over the top of the corn, all you could see was the top half of the actor. So he would be doing that on the back of the bike, and I'd literally roar off through the cornfields at 50, 60 miles an hour, throwing the sandbags out as I went, so that we got a cloud of dust coming up behind. So, we were able to do things like that in camera. It looked real, it was real. Superman kicking the football, we made a solid wooden football and buried a really big air reservoir in the ground and made an air cannon with a long barrel on it that the football fitted into. and the actor ran up and kicked where the end of the barrel was, and as he kicked, we fired the air cannon, and the wooden football disappeared about half a mile away. In fact, I think we hit one of the grain silos in the local town with it.
You mentioned obviously that Superman 1 and 2 were shooting simultaneously. Do you have any memories of anything that went into Superman 2 that you were particularly proud of?
There were lots of bits in Superman 2 when I saw it, but in all honesty, it was so long ago. Without sitting down and going through the picture scene by scene, I couldn't begin to remember what they are.
Did you ever see Richard Donner's version of Superman 2?
I'm sure I did at the time, but it was a long time ago.
And so, did you encounter Tom Mankiewicz, the creative consultant?
Yeah, I knew Tom very well. In fact, that's just reminded me of one of the scenes we did do for Superman 2, which was the escape of Lex Luthor from the prison.
Yes.
Early on in before we started filming, we went out to Canada for a recce to find all the locations, and there was Dick Donner, Tim Burrell, Tom, myself, John Barry. There were only about 6 of us, and we rented a Winnebago and we literally drove all over North Canada looking for the locations, which was great because we could, sit in the Winnebago and talk about the scenes and how we were going to do them while we drove, because there were long drives back then. Everything was so far apart. And I said to Dick one day, the scene as it's written for getting Lex Luthor out of the jail is not very good, in my opinion, because all the girl does is she drives up outside the prison, throws a rope over the wall. Lex Luthor grabs hold of it. She drives away and pulls him over the wall. Well, not really very believable to me. So he said, well, what would you do? So I said, well, just imagine Lex and Otis have come out of the prison into the prison yard, looking around to see how they're going to get out. And all of a sudden, all they could hear is a voice going, psst, psst, and trying to attract their attention. And eventually they look up and see Valerie in a black hot air balloon. And she drops a ladder down, rope ladder, and Lex climbs up the ladder and gets in the balloon. And then Otis starts to climb up. And every time he puts his foot on the tread, instead of him going up, it pulls the balloon down. So they cut free and they go off and leave Otis there. And Dick said, yeah, that's great. He said, write it for me. And I looked at him, never having been much of a writer. And he said, write it, and I want all the dialogue in there as well. Well, I then looked at Tom Mankiewicz, who wasn't fazed by it at all, because, he was the writer, but all these guys were so professional that they never felt threatened by people coming up with ideas or putting them in. And that's one of the reasons I love Dick so much, is working with him taught me so much about filmmaking, about effects, about the whole process. And I really loved him for that, because, I wrote the scene and I think it stayed pretty much verbatim in the movie. Those were the sort of things that made working with him and Superman 1 such a great memory.
So was Richard Lester then, by comparison, a bit more of a traditional director and perhaps less suited to something like Superman?
Well, I'd previously done Help, the Beatles film, and a funny thing happens on the way to the Forum with Dick Lester. And Juggernaut, I think I did after that, later on. And Dick was a great director, but he was a very fast director. He never seemed to do an awful lot of takes, which was great in many respects for what we do. But he was different to Donner, and I don't think the world, and certainly not the producers, ever gave Dick Donner the credit for setting up the whole look, style of Superman. And that's what brought that reality, and I think why most people love that first film so much.
Yeah, I think so. The sequel is a bit more. Not that there isn't lots of humor in the first Superman, but it's more sort of. It never makes fun of the character and the environment, whereas Richard Lester's stuff sometimes gets a bit too the other way. And I think you're right. They didn't value Richard Donner in terms of his uniqueness that he brought to the film. I definitely even recognise Christopher Reeve's contribution, because they sold the Superman rights, of course, after Superman 3. They didn't kind of really know what they had, the series of films they could have done. Did you have much to do with the producers, Piers Spangler and Edith Solkine? Were they around a lot?
I knew them quite well, and of course, when we were in Canada and New York shooting, but more Canada, I think we were all staying in the same hotel, so we did know them very well, and even when Dick Lester came out, I obviously knew him very well, so we were all friends and family, as it were. But I got to know Pierre and Ilya much better after Superman, because I knew their secretary very well back in those days, and spent a lot of time talking to them and going to their premieres and things, and they were all charming. We got on very well. I think the father was sometimes probably responsible more for the way people thought about them. I mean, I did a picture some years afterwards where they were producing it, and all of the crew insisted on being paid in cash every week, and we were filming out in Malta, and Friday night there'd be a queue of people down the hotel corridor, all queuing up to get dollars, and then they'd go down to the reception and put them in these little tin safes behind the reception. I think I worked it out. One week we'd been out there for a few weeks. There had to be something close on $1 million in this safe, which Yeah.
Do you recall the name of that film?
Yeah, it was Christopher Columbus.
I've had a feeling you might say that one because that's quite got infamous reputation. That one, I believe.
Well, of course, it was with the lovely John Glenn.
Yes, yes.
And when we were in Canada, I think Dick Donner wanted me to stay on out there and shoot some second unit stuff, which I couldn't because I'd already committed to doing another film back in Europe. And so John Glenn came out to direct the second unit. And I knew John quite well. We'd done a few movies together, mainly with him as an editor. John shot all the petrol station blow up and stuff, and then that was all for the second movie as well.
Yeah. Because I think also there were some scenes in Superman 2 that wouldn't, because I think the script was always changing as it went along. I think, and then of course Superman 2 was dropped to complete Superman 1 in time for the Christmas release. I think certain things originally for 2 would no longer work because the script for 1 had changed. So I think certain things kind of were shuffled around a little bit as a result. Do you have any? Of course, Christopher Reeve was a very established theatre actor at this time, but very new to films, and of course, a huge film two films, of course, to be the lead in. How do you find that he took on that responsibility? Was it quite a bit of weight on his shoulders? Did you get any sense that it was a challenge?
Chris always seemed to me to be a natural. I mean, I can remember when he arrived at Shepperton, and none of us had met him. And of course, the first thing they had to do was beef him up and get him in the gym and start to make him look more the part, which he took on with relish. And I always found him charming, very easy to talk to, very helpful on the set. And he was just a lovely guy. I mean, what happened to him in later life was really tragic.
Yeah, it was. And I think that the testimony of his great character was that what happened to him, a lot of people, most people, it would destroy them entirely, but he did. Arguably his greatest contributions was in those last few years for medical research and awareness, and I think that's where he really became a real life hero, as well as obviously the fictional hero as well. Did you ever get to meet him during those sort of later years, or?
I bumped into him once at a premiere in Los Angeles. And I honestly don't think I can even remember what the premiere was. I think it could have been a Paul Verhoeven movie. But that was really, I mean, we, in the initial years when they were still doing Superman 2, we were all still in and out of Pinewood all the time. So, you bump into one another in the restaurant or the bar or wherever, because that's where we all used to congregate, in those days. After that, of course, the Superman moved to ABPC EMI at Boreham Wood. And I don't think I saw him at all for some years, and then we just happened to bump into one another at a premiere. But and shortly after that, he had his accident.
You of course would work with Marlon Brando on the Christopher Columbus film as well
Yeah.
as Superman. Do you have any lasting memories of Marlon Brando?
No, he was, you know, excuse me. He was, what can you say about Brando? I mean, he was an iconic actor. He didn't remember his lines very well, which is why he had them written down there.
Yeah.
You know, everybody knew that. But I'd always found him, you know, the little I had to do with him, you know, he was charming and not, you know, aloof or unapproachable.
I mean, I think his justification for having the edit boards and it being written on the set, all his lines, was that he thought it would be more natural to see what you're going to say just before you, a bit like when you're talking in conversation now, you don't know what you're going to be saying. So whether that was partly an excuse for not wanting to learn the lines, or just not maybe having a good memory for them, it's possible.
Who knows? We'll never know that one.
Yeah. I want to ask you, Gene Hackman at all? Did you encounter him?
Funny enough, I'd the year before I'd done a film called Lucky Lady in Mexico with Gene Hackman, Burt Reynolds, and Liza Minnelli, directed by the lovely Stanley Donen. And I got to know Gene quite well. We were all out in Guaymas in Baja California for 6 months. And Gene was a great pilot. He loved stunt flying. And he had a Pitts special aerobatic plane brought down to Mexico, and an aerobatic pilot came down with it. And every Sunday we had a villa out on the bay, and Gene would take this Pitts special up and do aerobatics all over the bay there, until 20th Century Fox found out about it, queried the insurance and put a stop to it. But I had on that movie, Lucky Lady, I had a bit of an altercation with Burt Reynolds, mainly caused by one of his stuntmen who was not particularly helpful. And we had a bit of a set to on the boat one day, right in front of Gene. And Gene came up to me afterwards, and we had a chat. And then, of course, the picture finished, and we all ended up friendly, shall we say. And then, probably less than 12 months later, there I am on the set at Shepperton, standing next to Gene. So we had a chat about Lucky Lady and Bert and the funny things that happen. And he was a great actor, still is. I mean, I don't know if you've seen pictures of him lately. He's 91 now.
I have. He looks very good, isn't he?
He's starting to look a bit frail, I think, but he's a man's man, and he was just great. I mean, we did bullet hits around him and explosions, and this was on Lucky Lady, and he was up for all of it. And I had to do a scene one day where he was in a little wooden dinghy, in the sea, and the dinghy got shot up and had to sink with him standing in it. And you know, difficult scene to shoot in the sea when you've got, you know, 25 feet of water underneath and no anchor points, and you've got to control a boat with a leading actor in it. But he was great. I mean, he just got out there and did it. And, you know, I told him what to expect and what we were going to do. And he was helpful, charming, lovely man.
No, that's wonderful. Of course, he has a wonderful sidekick, Otis, played by Ned Beatty. Do you remember Ned at all?
Yeah, I mean, Ned was great. He was a funny man on the set and off the set. I didn't have an awful lot to do with him, but you know, they were all you know, good actors, from, you know, Margot Kidder. You know, everybody sort of got on with their job, and I can't ever remember any problems or troubles on Superman. You know, we had Larry Hagman turn up to do the car crash scene with the missile, and he was a larger than life character, and you know, great fun on the set. And he and Dick knew one another very well, so they sort of gelled. Yeah, happy days.
Yeah, it all seems like a very good, a very nice, good cast, a good crew, a very happy environment from, you know, from all accounts. Looking at some of the crew members, Jeffrey Umsworth, of course, I think helped a lot with the special effects and visual effects because of the way he lit certain scenes. It might have made it easier to paint out the wires, that sort of thing. What would you say his contribution was, and what was he like as a person?
Jeff was lovely. I mean, he was a very nice man. He was a gentleman. We always got on very well. I did 3 or 4 pictures with him. In fact, you know, he lit Lucky Lady as well. So he worked with Gene the same. Jeff liked a lot of smoky atmosphere on the set, which sometimes got more than a little heavy. I can remember going onto a set on one movie where you literally could hardly see your hand in front of your face. There was so much smoke. And you know, he loved a lot of backlight, which I think worked for a lot of movies. I'm not sure it worked as well on Bridge Too Far. But having said that, you know, that film still stands up and is so iconic, you know, as a war movie. But yeah, I did Lucky Lady, Bridge Too Far, Royal Flash, all with Jeff, and he was, you know, they were great crews, you know, back then. I'm sure they still are today, but I had I was privileged to work with some of the best out there. Funnily enough, my father did the effects on Lawrence of Arabia.
Oh yes, yeah.
And I used to go out on my school holidays and work with him around that time on Lawrence and Exodus and different movies. And I came across the unit list for Lawrence when they were filming in Almeria. And I think I worked after that with pretty much every name on the unit list. And such great technicians and people, and really, you know, top of their profession, because they all, back in those days, people learned, they started at the bottom of the tree and learned the business as they went through it, which is why I think many of the directors of yesteryear were so talented. And, when you think people like Lewis Gilbert, you could fly off to Malaya and shoot a major film with William Holden, Susanna York, great many stars, with battles and guns and all sorts of things going off. You'd shoot the whole thing in 12 weeks. There were never reshoots. There was never the chance to do reshoots. But these directors knew their work and their professionalism. And, Dick Donner, Dick Lester, they were all the same. So, working with people like that in my career, and Billy Wilder, Richard Attenborough, John Glenn, I consider, that I was really privileged to experience that. Every movie you see now, they spend $20 million on reshoots. And the funny thing was, I posted the Lawrence of Arabia crew list on Facebook, and a very old producer friend of mine rang me up the next day and said, would I mind sending him a copy, because he wanted to put it on the wall in his office so that all the crew that on his present film could see how a huge film like Lawrence could be made with a fraction of the crew that they now need to make a movie.
Yeah. I mean, do you find that a lot of it, because I don't know, one thing obviously that's changed quite a lot is big things like health and safety and certain requirements to do certain things. Does that automatically add a certain number of crew and a certain number of hours, etc.? So are these kind of partly the reasons why now huge numbers of people work on films?
Well, yeah, but health and safety has added a whole different perspective on things, but I don't think it's increased the crew levels that much. I have to question how on earth we survived climbing step ladders and doing dangerous things like we did. I mean, we did films like the ones I've just mentioned, Lucky Lady. We were out at sea for months on end, doing all sorts of things on sailboats and other boats, and explosions and fires and blowing things up. We never had a life jacket on between us. Nobody bore a life jacket. We didn't need it. Nobody drowned.
No.
And you look at it now, and I think personal responsibility is being taken away from people. And I hate to think what the next generation are going to be like, because they're going to need to be mollycoddled all their lives.
I think you've only got to watch the news sometimes, and you sort of see certain things that are happening in various countries around the world. And it does seem that some elements of society are starting to de-evolve a little bit. We're certainly losing something that, say, your generation had, or etc. It seems to be a bit of a problem, really. But you're quite right. The crew list, if you look at just on Superman, people like John Barry, the production designer, Derek Meddings, all the stunt people, Vic Armstrong, Paul Weston, etc. It's a who's who, isn't it, of technicians. And do you remember production designer John Barry at all?
Yeah, I worked a lot with John. I did The Little Prince, Lucky Lady,
Hmm.
and Superman.
Yeah.
He was lovely, John. Spent a lot of time with him. He was another great production designer because he, came up working with people like Elliot Scott,
Hmm.
who knew the industry like the back of their hand. And, these were great people to work with and learn from.
Hmm. I know she was on Superman and also I think some of the Bond films that you did as well. Continuity lady, Elaine
Great.
Schweik,
Yeah.
yes. Do you
Yeah,
remember Elaine?
I did a lot of films with Elaine.
Hmm.
And of course, she worked a lot with Richard Donner.
Hmm.
And we did Lady Hawk out in Rome and Italy with Dick Donner, and Elaine was the continuity on that.
Hmm.
And funny enough, we were filming up in the mountains in Cortina.
Hmm.
And Elaine was telling us stories of how she'd been up there working on a film in the 1940s, but, all these people, the industry was much smaller back then, and we all knew one another. And whatever film came out, you'd look at the credits and, work with him, work with him, work with him. Now I can look at a movie and I hardly recognize a name.
Hmm. Yeah, I suppose it all moves on a little bit, and
Yeah.
do you find it's probably not as easy perhaps to get in the industry as perhaps maybe it was before? I don't know whether that's fair, but whether it's just
Yeah, well, I mean, it's always been a nepotistic industry, as I can demonstrate myself.
yeah.
So yeah, there were a lot of people all the same, but it was studios were much nicer then. They were, you didn't have to go through the rigmarole that you have to go through now to get into a studio. You could just drive up to Pinewood and wave to the guy on the gate and go and have a drink in the bar whenever you wanted, whether you were working there or not.
I mean, as a fan, I've been to a few of the Bond events at Pinewood. My dad started taking me when I was 12, so that would have been 96 was the first time he went, and of course we went to one just last October. And yeah, from our point of view, just as visitors, how Pinewood has changed in terms of now got these big, security. It's a whole different, new way to get in, and it's all very. I think especially as Disney's taken over as well, I think that's sort of added a certain layer to it as well. But, and so just sort of just to wrap up our conversation, do you remember watching Superman for the first time, maybe as a preview screening or at a premiere?
Yeah, just trying to think where I did see it for the first time. I think I probably went to a cruise screening somewhere. I don't know. I was abroad so much back in those days, but I can remember being very pleased when I did see it. But of course, it was around the time that they'd dropped Dick Donner. So there was a certain amount of angst about, the whole thing then. But, the movie itself was so good. And, the John Williams music and, everything about it was great. And, nobody could believe after the movie came out that they dropped Richard Donner from doing the next one. It just didn't make sense.
But yeah, I mean, obviously, relationships can be frayed on anything, especially if it's lots of pressure that Superman had. But you would have thought they would have tried to have reconciled any differences, you know, and moved on. But unfortunately, not.
Yeah, but I mean, I think Donna was as surprised as anybody. But yeah, it was. It it was such a good film in every way, and you know, I think, you know, having watched as a kid, you know, the television Superman things, and they were always a bit hokey, if that's the right word.
Yeah.
But what Donna did with number one was quite amazing, and I think he deserves all the credit for it.
Oh yeah, and it still holds up so well today, doesn't it? So every time you see it, it doesn't really, like any film, there's always certain things that date it because of fashion or whatever it might be, but it is kind of a classic, timeless film that isn't touched by age, I think. Having said that, though, is there anything from your point of view that you sometimes look at and think, oh, I wish I could have done that a bit differently? Or,
well, I mean, yes, there are. I don't think I've ever worked on a movie where I haven't looked at one scene or the other and thought, maybe we could have done that, or you know, we shot that, why didn't they use that bit in the edit instead of that bit? You know, there are always things. But you got to live with those.
And as time goes on, can you sit back and watch a film you've worked on just as an audience member, not sort of got your, you know, creative hat on?
I always say, if it's a good film, I can watch it and enjoy it. If it's a bad film, I'll pick it to pieces. But
and did you obviously saw the Superman sequels? I take it you didn't obviously like them half as much as the
I saw the first one or two. I don't think I bothered after that. I certainly didn't bother after the Canon efforts.
No, the Superman 4 is not a good example. It's a good example of what not to do. So it may be something that should be in film schools, but unfortunately, I suppose you can say, I suppose some people will say what they want about the Cell Kinds, but they did put a lot of money into their Superman films, and it's certainly, I think, the production value is obviously very, very high.
I think they were forced to put a lot of money into number one by Donna, because he knew he had a vision, he knew what he wanted to do, and the only way he could do it was to do it properly, which is what he did, which is why they ended up having to put so much money into it. Why they couldn't see that continuing with that thing, particularly having created the ways of doing things with the first film, the second and the third should have been much cheaper to produce, because you'd already worked out most of the problems, particularly with things like the flying and, you know, Zoran Perisic and all that stuff. But you know, instead of, you know, concentrating on getting a good script and carrying on with the same format, to switch to you know, a cheaper format all round, I think cost them money in the end instead of making it, you know.
Oh yeah, I think there's an astonishing drop in the quality. I mean, it's still good films, but compared to one, it is a drop from the get-go. Not having Marlon Brando back, of course, from a, you know, I mean, I've not got a producer's head or anything, but it's certainly creatively doesn't seem to make sense. So I get the feeling if Dick Donner had come back for two and they wanted to make it in the way they did, he probably would have walked anyway. Maybe it would have been an issue.
I mean, the theory was that, or word of mouth was, and I've got no idea if this is true or not, that Brando only came back to do Columbus to get the money that was owed to him from Superman.
I believe that, yes.
Now, hey ho, there's always rumours out there, so whether they're true or not, little folk like me never really know, but it wouldn't surprise me. Maybe that's why he wasn't on two, but
I've got the feeling that he would have been paid properly for one, but of course his contract would have been two as well, and he would have had a similar arrangement in terms of, and that of course was denied him because he wasn't brought into it. So
there's always residual payments and payments for television and other things that come afterwards. So you never know what the contracts are. It's like Tom Mankiewicz writing the first one, and he did the second one, but you don't know. I not being around on Superman 2, I wouldn't like to guess.
I mean, Tom didn't come back for two. He still has the creative consultant credit because they used his script as the basis, and then David and Leslie Newman came in. So he, a bit like yourself, didn't want to do it without Richard Donner. So there's quite a few people that took the same sort of stance. Is there any final comments you'd like to make about the film or any experiences on it that we haven't mentioned?
No, I mean, I think we covered pretty much everything. I say it's happy memories, and a great time working with Richard Donner and a good crew. It was challenging work, but that's what we've all lived for.
And how does it sit in the body of your work? Is it sort of in like your top 10, or where do you place
it? People always ask me what was my favourite movie, and it's a question I can never ever answer because I did 9 James Bonds, 8 Harry Potters, but in between those, challenging pictures like Lucky Lady or The Omen or Aliens, Starship Troopers, every single one had different reasons to be the most enjoyable picture, whether it was work challenge, director challenge, just the fun of working with people, or being in the Bahamas, diving every day to do underwater stuff, or working on a Bond, being surrounded by Bond girls every morning when you go to work. I mean, there's so many different reasons that to pluck one out of the air, I couldn't do it. Early in my career, I did 3 films on the trot. One was The Devils with Ken Russell, followed by The Straw Dogs with Sam Peckinpah, followed by what was it called? Not Serpico. Anyway, it was a film directed by Michael Winner. I won't go there, but they were 3 really difficult movies, and I thought at the end of it, if I can get through that lot, because none of them were easy directors, although I had a particularly soft spot for Ken Russell, and did several films with him. You go on to other movies that you just go to work with a smile on your face every day. even if the work is really hard and challenging. But yeah, I mean, Superman sits up there. I suppose it's it's got to be in the top 10 somewhere. Even just for the fact that it was working with Donna.
Oh yeah. I think for most people, but movie fans, it is in the top 10, and for superhero fans, it's always the film that every other superhero film, Marvel, etc., has never quite got to that level. I don't think. Before I let you go, John, you've done. Am I correct in saying you've done quite a bit of work for Warner Brothers for like the Harry Potter tour experience and the Forbidden Forest thing that was last November? I think it's coming back this year. You worked on those, haven't you?
Yeah, I'm still there. I mean, would you believe I've been involved with Harry Potter for 23 years now, since the first one?
Yeah.
And we're still working at Leavesden for the Warner Brothers tour, putting new stuff in, which is why I'm on night work most of next month, putting some new stuff in the Great Hall.
Yeah.
To wow the crowds. So it keeps me going and stops the grey cells from dying completely.
No, it sounds like a wonderful thing to work on, keep that association going. And we went to the Forbidden Forest last year or the year before, whenever it was, and I don't know if you had anything to do with it, but the unicorn that walks in the background, that I thought was spectacular.
Yeah, that was Nick Dublin. Great work. Nick did all the creature stuff. I got involved with the Aragog spider and all the spiders that come.
Yeah, that was very creepy.
So yeah, we've got a lot of stuff throughout the tour. And I've got a team of guys there. We maintain it and build the new stuff. So.
Yeah, so it sounds wonderful. I hope to go back to the tour at some point, because you say you keep adding new stuff, and it's always worth a visit. Well, thank you very much, John, for talking to me about your Superman in particular, but of course the other things you've touched on. It's been a real pleasure.
My pleasure, and let me know, and we'll do Bond in the future.
I'll look forward to it. That'd be lovely.
You take care.
Bye. So testing 1 2 3. Testing 1 2 3. Welcome to this talk with Rick Drew.
Good morning.
Hi, Rick. How you doing?
Hi there. Good. Nice to see you.
Nice to see
Hope
you.
things are well.
Have you had a nice day?
It's early here yet, but I've done the best with what I've got so far.
Good. You had a nice summer?
Yeah, it's been very pleasant here, except for the rest of the province being on fire, but we've been pretty good. We've got a lot of fires here.
Oh yeah, I heard. Yes. I think most of Europe has been on fire, and Hawaii, and I think the UK is one of the few places that fortunately has sort of escaped that sort of thing, really.
Yeah, I think between the UK and Vancouver, we get the most rain, so I guess there's something to be said for being soggy. Yes.
So we are having the next week. Apparently, it's going to be quite hot, and it's been quite hot today. So we're getting last minute summer sun, which is nice.
Yeah, I've been in London in August, and just the fact there's no ice available anywhere and no air conditioning. It's not a great place for heat.
Yeah. I think we're not prepared for the heat, and we're not prepared for the snow or anything. So if it's sort of clement and miserable, we're pretty good. If it's extremes, we're not ready for it.
That's very true.
Okay, well, thank you very much for joining me to talk about your experiences on Superman the movie. It's very much appreciated.
Oh, I'm glad you're interested.
Oh yeah, it's one of those classic films, isn't it? That I think just each generation finds it again and is kind of immortal, really.
Yeah, it's kind of obviously it was a big film at the time when we were making it, and I was very young and just out of high school, and it was a very small I was a very small part of it for the Canadian shoot,
Hmm.
but it certainly has occupied a big space in my memory of working on films.
Because I take you always had an interest in film from a very
Oh
early age.
yeah, I grew up in the area where we shot the Canadian parts of all the Smallville things and that, and but I was writing screenplays in high school, which was very unusual in a town of 900 people. So I've always been interested in film, and I'm a screenwriter now and have been for many, many years,
Hmm.
and teach it as well. So that's kind of what I do now.
So that was always the angle that interests you from the early days. It was the writing side of the business.
Well, just in general, the writing was my first point of entry because it was something that I could do without being part of the industry, and kind of familiarize myself with it from inside of the creative elements. And then I got a job on, I don't know if you ever heard of a film called Days of Heaven.
Does ring a bell.
Uh, it was actually nominated for Oscars the same year that Superman was. And but it was Terry Malick, one of his early films, his second one, and it was nominated for 4 Oscars. And so I worked on that a couple about the year before, 2 years I guess before Superman, and then I worked on an Altman film as a production assistant, and I worked myself up to being an assistant director before I just exclusively pursued my filmmaking or screenwriting career. And so I had that opportunity to really participate in just by sheer chance of these films being made right in the area where I was living, to have this experience on different films and see a different variety of really talented filmmakers working, and it certainly informed my writing.
And how did you get to be involved in those productions? Were they looking for local people to help with
Yeah. It was just because I had worked on 2 other films with the people who were doing the local hiring on Superman. I had a relationship with the production manager, and he knew I was reliable, and so he hired me just to be what they call a production assistant, a PA, to work in the office and on set and in between, kind of like an office runner, and doing all kinds of stuff. But the nice thing about that sort of experience is you end up being a liaison with all of the departments. And so I spent a lot of time in the art department and with the prop makers and in wardrobe and on set, and so and running call sheets to actors and production reports, and taking the film at the end of the day to the airport. And you're kind of embedded in the whole mix of things in a different way than you might be if you were just in one specific department. So it was a great broad experience of exposure to everything that was going on.
Mm-hmm. And I assume getting your foot in the doors as a production assistant was a lot easier when you did it, as opposed to maybe how people would do it.
I think it's still one of the best entry points if you want to get involved in the film production business or in television. If you can get, the key is to get, regardless of what you want to do, the key is to get inside that door, whatever it is. I often hear even the students that I teach now say they would, whatever is available, they would do anything in order to work on a film. And the key, I think, is to really consider what do you have to offer that's unique sometimes. But you can't really do that until you get to know the people, and you can't get to know the people until you get inside. And so for example, just on the writing side, there was a series made here called Bates Motel, and they shot here for several years, the entire run of the show, 4 or 5 years. And one of our writing students got a job as an assistant to the producer, which was basically, kind of a dog's body sort of a job. But once she was inside, then she got people to read her work. And by the 3rd year she was there, she was in the writer's room. But you have to, the key is really just get in the door in whatever fashion you can, get to know the people, because it's all a job of any job. It's about not being an asshole, basically. It's just being somebody who's reliable and fun to work with and dependable. And once you've done that, then all kinds of doors open.
Oh yeah, yeah. So were you a Superman fan? Were you kind of, was there a bit of hype for this going in?
Sure. I mean, I grew up with the comic books, of course, and the old TV show. It was old even when I was a kid. And so, I mean, I don't know anybody who at any time since the 1930s has been a Superman fan in some fashion. The irony of the stuff that we shot for 6-7 weeks is we didn't do any scenes with Christopher Reeve. We did all the Smallville stuff and the missile convoy stuff at the end of the film, and some pieces of the Lois Lane driving through the desert, and all kinds of stuff that was bits and pieces that were in part 2 as well. One thing I would want to make a point to say is what a tremendous gentleman and wonderful person Richard Donner was, because the producers were not nice to him. They forced him off the film. And I remember there were days when he and Richard Lester, who ultimately was credited with directing the second film and subsequent films, they would ride out to set together on the anticipation that Donner might walk that day. And imagine, I don't know if you can hear those annoying dogs barking, sorry, just in the courtyard downstairs. But he was a total pro, and they were very professional with each other, and they both realized they were victims of the producers. And I can't say, it was amazing to see. And I talked with him. I went to the AFI briefly in 1980, and I had a chance to reconnect with him and chat when I was there. And we talked a bit about it because I couldn't talk to him frankly about it at the time, and certainly was not my place. But observing it, it was interesting after the fact to say to him many years later, wow, what a pain in the ass to be working on the biggest film in the world and to have the producers working against you. And you never, ever, ever saw that crossover into his work. He was always pleasant and professional and just the greatest guy.
Oh yeah, I mean, there's so many pressures he had. I mean, obviously 2 pictures shooting simultaneously at that time. New technology never been tried.
Well, everything was new. I mean, the joke for after the film was made, the tagline was, "You will believe a man can fly." But then when we shot the Clark Kent scenes with him running beside the train, it didn't look that great. So we joked afterwards, fly, yes, run, no. But then, of course, in those days, there was no CGI. They barely were doing they were still obviously they were doing blue screen, but that was composite matte technology. But when we shot Jeff East running beside the train during the Smallville stuff, he was hanging off the side of a truck going 40 miles an hour on a crane, running with his feet in space with no contact onto anything, beside a moving train, a safe distance from it, mind you, but that was all in-camera stuff. And it was remarkable, the amount of rigging and just the pure labor of the special effects that were done in camera. Completely different now to, you just see people like in a Cameron film or what have you, with the green suits and dots on their face, and it's all done in post. But we were doing that live in camera all the time, and that took a lot of time and a lot of physical effort and creative professionalism from every department.
And you had you mentioned the effects people, John Richardson being a key player.
He was a wonderful guy. Yeah, we called him Johnny Rich for whatever reason, but that was kind of his name. And he had, I know he'd just gone through, I think he'd been working on A Bridge Too Far, and there was a car accident where he lost, I think it was his fiance, and he was really, really devastated by that. And that's a kind of personal thing to say, but it was part of what I admired about him as I heard about that just from the crew. And the nice thing is, one of the best things about the film was the British crew, obviously. And they had all just come off a new movie called The Star Wars, and we wondered what that was going to be like. Mm-hmm. But they had all worked together on so many different projects. I mean, Les Dilley, who was one of the key members in the art department, and Stuart Freeborn, of course, who did all of 2001 and everything, and of course Star Wars, and created Yoda. And there were so many people who were, and Norm Reynolds, and also in the art department, who were like absolute top of their game in the art department and in the wardrobe department, Yvonne Blake. And they were all the best in the world. And they had all worked together on so many different projects in the UK. And so they were like very much like a family. And it was very nice to feel, even for a short time, to be part of that very special family that worked so well together. And literally every single one of them was the best in the world at what they did.
And you mentioned Yvonne Blake. I think she worked. I think Margot Kidder had certain, not certain ideas of how a character would look.
Yeah, Margot was a pain in the ass and wonderful simultaneously. For example, one of the outfits that she wore in the film, she bought at the Hudson's Bay in Calgary, because she wanted to wear that, which of course drove Yvonne, I wouldn't presume to say it drove her mad, but it was not well received. And so that meant, of course, on a film of that scale, you never have one of anything. But if you're talking about a key character like Lois Lane, you have to have multiples for stunt doubles and multiples for backup and everything. So this one outfit that Margot bought at the local department store then had to be deconstructed and reconstructed and duplicated, and the fabric duplicated. And you can imagine, it's like, okay, it's wonderful she needs to wear this, but we virtually have to clone this 100 times in order for that to be possible. And Margot wasn't doing it to be difficult. Margot had a wonderful childlike quality to her. Like, for example, when we were shooting the stuff in what they called the Indian Reservation, in the movie where the big gas station blows up, Margot just decided to ride a horse because we had some time while we were doing stuff. So that means, okay, now we have to now change Margot's wardrobe. And that's an hour delay because Margot decided to get on a horse and go for a ride, which is, you can't call it unprofessional. Well, yeah, I guess you could, but it's illustrative of a bad choice that somebody without, but it was that same childlike whimsy that she brought to Lois Lane. So it just came as part of the package.
You could say she would have had to change her outfit, but also if she got hurt, then that could potentially shut the film down.
Anything. I'll tell you a very quick story. I don't know how much time you've got. When we were shooting the gas station explosion, we needed to have maybe you've heard this story, or I've told it on the podcast, but we had to get the car, the red Lois Lane car that's in the film, in the desert, that ultimately ended up in the earthquake at the end of the movie. Anyway, so we had to position Margot driving the car for a helicopter shot. So David Tomlin, the first AD, who is a legendary first AD, I mean, all of the Star Wars first trilogy, the Indiana Jones films, he was like the ultimate first AD, former British Marine, not a guy to be messed with, very authoritative. And so I'm driving him, and with Margot in the back seat in the red Lois Lane car, to the drop-off point so that Margot can drive the car. And then we had an identical car, the backup car, following us that would drive David and I back out of the shot so they could get the helicopter shot of Margot. we were following our own water truck, and David wanted me to go around him because the helicopter was waiting and the crew and everything else. So I was passing the water truck, but our water truck, saw the identical red car still behind him, not realizing that two identical red cars would be following him. So he moved back into the middle of the road and forced us off the road into the ditch. So I've got the star of the movie in the back seat in the first AD, and Margot in the back, and run into the ditch with the helicopter waiting. It was not a good day at work, but that's why I have two cars. But the funny thing is Margot just started screaming obscenities, just, "You mother effer," this and that. And then she tapped me on the shoulder. "Not you, dear, the driver."
Mm.
That's my fondest memory of what Margot was like.
Mm.
And I would take her shopping and help her babysit. And I just hung out with her a lot.
So you got to know her quite well on the
Yeah,
film.
yeah. In fact, I won't get into the story, but I managed to bullshit my way into going to the Oscars in '79 because I'd worked on Superman and I'd worked on Days of Heaven, and I convinced our provincial government to make me a representative and go to the Oscars, which was just absurd. And so I hadn't seen Margot since Superman. And after the whole ceremony was over, and I saw her coming down the stairs while everyone's in our lobby waiting for the car. And I just said, "Hi, Margot." And she just said, "Rick, what the fuck are you doing here?" And this is like, 2-3 years later, but she still remembered me.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, but it's lovely when people, people do remember you, and there was
and Margot was very, very real, and that the same vulnerability that made her such a great actor is the same thing, I'm afraid, that made her personal life so difficult with her different personal issues.
Well, she of course was very fond of Richard Donner, and when the producers kind of kicked him out, she was very vocal, and I think that hurt.
Yeah,
her future Superman appearances, but she was
I'm
honest.
not sure. I couldn't say. I mean, that was all after the fact, but it probably didn't help. But I don't. It wouldn't take much. They were just very unpleasant people. Do you know the story? What happened with the 3 and 4 Musketeers film that they produced with Richard Lester?
I think it was originally just to be the 3 Musketeers, and it was
Right.
quite a long script. They divided it into 2, and of course nobody got paid, for 2 films.
Which is precisely why, because of the resulting lawsuit, they owed Richard Lester another film. And that was one of the reasons they forced Richard Lester onto Superman, because it was just kind of covering their bases with the lawsuit.
Yeah.
And that was that's no way to do business. I mean,
yeah.
But I don't know if it was so much Ilias and Pierre as it was the elder Salkin. I think he was the one who was kind of pushing those buttons, because there's Ilya and Pierre Spengler and Ilya Salkin, but there was an elder. I think it was the elder Salkin,
Alexander,
almost the equivalent of that's right. I was going to say it's almost the equivalent of a Covey Broccoli, or a De Laurentiis. I think he was one of those guys who were primarily money people who really shouldn't have had their thumbs in the creative. And I think it was, I'm just guessing, but I think it was probably as much his influence as anything else. But they were very unpleasant people when we were working. They were the only ones that absolutely everyone on the crew, it was like one big family, but they were not part of not part of the vision, not part of the excitement. They were just the money, and that was evident. There was not a creative spark in their entire existence, and that was one of the kind of weird benefits of being on the outside looking in, just being a kind of fly on the wall PA, because it meant I was hearing things in every department, not eavesdropping, just by exposure. And so I felt like I really had a big picture of what was going on in some ways.
Because when I talk to other people, John Richardson, I talked to recently, and about these issues behind the scenes, and a lot of the people involved in the film weren't really aware of them. But because you were sort of a step back, you had a better idea.
Because they were obviously focused on their jobs, and being the consummate professionals they were. But I was faxing stuff in the office, and for example, I spent an hour faxing a contract to General Mills about how long the Cheerios box would be on the table in that early product placement of in Clark Kent's home, the young Clark.
Yeah. Yes, it's very obvious bit of product placement, that, isn't it? But it's
yeah, that was. I think there's always been product placement, but it was very specific of placement on the screen, number of seconds on the screen. It was interesting just to see stuff like that, which was, I'm just a PA on a film, but it was a great insight for me to see that sort of thing.
Yes, I think even some of the latest Bond films, a lot of the budget seems to come from product placement these days.
Oh yeah, what watch is Bond wearing? What car is Bond driving? What brand of condom does he use?
Yeah,
probably not. He gets those from M.
Yeah,
just to push the wrong button.
Yeah. So you mentioned shooting at the Kent farmhouse. What? Because I believe that was not a functioning farmhouse. It was
No, it was already. In fact, as far as I know, it's still there.
I think it
and
is.
It was, and at the time it was just there are a lot of farms that are, I guess you could call them abandoned, but it's a huge agricultural region, and so there are houses that the acreage is worth far more than the homestead, and so when somebody sells the property to a bigger entity, the home part of it is not relevant because they've got 1,000 acres of fields. There's the actual point of the purchase. And so there's a lot of empty houses on these huge acreages. And that was one of them. And it was perfect, obviously. I remember one of my fondest memories of working on the film was watching Richard Donner directing Aaron, who played the baby Superman, in the scene where the truck drops and he lifts it up and they, for the first time, see he has these powers. And it was Donner just literally lying on his stomach 2 feet from the little boy, convincing him that he was lifting the truck. You can do it, Aaron. You can do it. You can do it. And he really believed he was doing it in that moment. It was really sweet.
Yeah.
And I also, the scene where all of the mist is in the trench where the geodas hit the field. Whenever I see that, I remember the call sheet coming out late and realizing that was going to be the first shot because of the angle of the light. And so I had to go around to local dairies and beg, borrow, and steal, but certainly bought a shit ton of dry ice, which we needed for the first shot in the morning. And so whenever I see that scene, I don't see a child arriving from space. I see me in a station wagon in the rain driving around in the dark to dairies trying to get dry ice.
Was that the most difficult request you had to fulfill in the film?
Oh, there's all kinds of things. It's all many years ago, but that one was particularly memorable. The fun thing about when you look at films you've worked on is there's the frame of the film that you see, but then there's a whole world around that frame that is contained with memories that are like home movies. Like you'll see a scene and it'll be a really moving scene, but then you'll remember, oh, I remember what we had for lunch and catering that day. Or I remember Margot going for a ride on the horse or being run out the road by a water truck. and also standing, probably 200 feet from that gas station when it blew up, and feeling the heat of it. So it's their home movies to some degree, regardless of how big the film is.
Do you find as the years go by, you can watch it a bit more as an audience member, or is it always kind of?
No, if anything, it triggers more memories, because they're fond memories. Even though the water truck incident was not my best day, it's a story. I don't know if you know about the wooden football.
I think John Richardson fired it out of a cannon, didn't he? Yeah.
But do you know what happened to that football?
No, I don't think I do.
I kept it for 35 years. And I had it in my storage locker. And I don't know if you ever saw a TV show called MacGyver.
I've seen some, yes.
Yeah. I worked on that, wrote for that for 3 years. And I had this bag from MacGyver that had the wooden football in it that I just kept as a souvenir, because as the PA, I had to go and find it in case we needed it again, because we only had 2. And that was the second one. The first one almost hit the grain elevators. It went too far. And I couldn't get that one back, but I had to go and get that football. So anyway, and that's another great example of what would ordinarily be CG today. This was just the physical, you had to bury an air cannon and fire it. Anyway, I kept it, and then I thought, I wonder if anybody wants this, because what am I going to do with it? So I contacted the prop auction house, and they said, well, do you have anything else? And I said, well, I've got some old call sheets and some stationery and some photos that I took on set, and stuff that nobody's ever seen. Also some old, just a second, just have to blow my nose. Pardon me. Some old photographs from a wardrobe department that were just being tossed out when they didn't want to take them back to England, and I just kept them as souvenirs, like continuity photos. Anyway, of the stuff they'd already shot at Pinewood. So, and the ADs had given me some photographs of the Fortress of Solitude and things they were shooting. And so I put this stuff together, and I got over $10,000 for the football and all this stuff that's just been sitting in drawers. So that was nice. And I also like that it's gone to somebody who is really going to treasure it rather than just sitting in a box in my storage locker. I did have it out in my office for a while in different times, but it was just a souvenir. But it's these things from these iconic movies just become someone else's talisman. And what a great conversation piece to have. Well, but I wouldn't pay $10,000 for it.
No, I've got. I tend to collect signatures and things like that, but not too many props. And it's but it's interesting what is thrown away as well, because
oh, absolutely, there's a whole industry based on what is thrown away, and I think today people are a lot more conscious of what they hang on to. That's why you find out that somebody still has, the dress that Princess Leia wore in one scene in Star Wars, and they've still got it carefully kept and preserved in a cupboard somewhere. Whereas before it would have just been recycled and been in 100 different movies by now.
Oh yeah. I mean, it's I think there's so much used to go in the skip back in the 70s and 80s, and now everything goes to places like prop stores, and as it sells it on. Did you see the extended TV cut of Superman the movie when it came out on Blu-ray recently?
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah, on a disc. I'm a big collector of discs. I like physical media.
Oh, me too. Yeah, because of course there's a lot of additional Canadian material in that.
Yeah, and a lot of it was we shot a lot of bits and pieces for part 2 that were in the Donner cut as well. Nothing that extreme, but I know there's a scene, I think it was in like an extended cut of the flood when the dam breaks. And I can see myself in the extras running around, which is nice to see I remember those shoes.
Yeah. And the bits that are in Superman 2, do you know what those particular bits and pieces were? I'm just trying to
Honestly,
think myself what it would be.
they're just kind of fragmentively scattered. I haven't looked at it in a long time, but it's more stuff that I just remember shooting. But because it was still considered Richard Lester's film, it's I don't believe there was much. Part of the problem is that we had a script for part 1 and part 2, obviously, while we were making the films, but they used the end of part 2 to finish part 1 because they never finished shooting part 1. And so part of what Tom Mankiewicz, and he was there the whole time, the screenwriter, he really wrote far more of the film than anyone else. And he's the one that Donner brought in because the script obviously was never that great. And they were finding this impossible task of what can we shoot for part 2? What can we shoot for part 1? With the time and money crunch of trying to get part 1 completed, they ended up reconfiguring and rewriting to use the spinning the world back that was intended to end part 2 as the end of part 1. But you probably knew that. The other thing, for example, the lowest, and I think this is a good example of how complex the production was. I mentioned the scene where Margot's driving through the Indian reservation, as they called it. We call them reserves in Canada, and we call them First Nations. It's a whole other thing. When the telephone poles start to fall, we did all that stuff, and we built all those telephone poles, and they were progressively shorter to give a force perspective. But then by the time the earthquake opens up and she goes into the earth, that was shot over a year later in New Mexico. And then, of course, the interior of the car with her in the dirt was shot in the studio in Pinewood. So that one sequence was shot in 3 different countries over the course of over a year. And I think there's a number of elements in the film that you could say that about. That's just how big and complicated a film it was.
And it was such a long shoot. If you look at Christopher Reeve, his build changes quite dramatically between some of the scenes.
Yeah, for sure. And I met him by sheer coincidence. I was in Calgary back visiting. I'd since moved to Vancouver, where I am still. And my wife and I were in Calgary when they were finishing shooting part 2. And I went to the wrap party because I knew so many of the same people. And that's the only time I met Chris Reeve was at that wrap party.
Did he leave a nice impression?
He was so tall.
Yeah.
He was like, there was a real, by that time, he was very much Superman. Whereas when he was making the film, he was still the unknown guy who was going to be Superman. And there was certainly a star quality to him. And he was very nice, of course. But I didn't talk to him much. It was his party. And he didn't know me. I just said hi. I worked on the first one. Too bad we never got to do any stuff with you. That's about all I had. It was a conversation, but I'm really glad that I had that experience because it was weird to be making Superman and never meet Superman.
Yes, I suppose a lot of people, when you say you've done Superman, they say, well, what's Christopher Reeve like? And of course, it might be disappointing if they then say, I'd never met him on it. But
yeah.
You mentioned Richard Lester was around a lot. How did Richard Lester and Richard Donner get on? Was there?
They got on great. They got on. They're both extraordinarily professional. Nothing but professional. They were both, like I said, kind of. It's probably not to find a point to put on it to say that they were victims, not victims because they weren't passive, but they were in a position that was beyond their control based on the choices of the producers, and they were both consummate professionals.
Oh, good.
And in no way did you get a sense of rivalry or, I mean, they rode out together in the car to set. I mean, you would think if this is the guy who's sitting on your set, in case you walk on the biggest film in the world, and that just underscores my absolute admiration for Donner.
Yeah,
and everybody was aware of it.
Yeah,
it wasn't a secret.
Yeah,
and yet, and that kind of pressure was not exclusively on Donner. That was on everybody. Every day, there was time and money pressure. You were always aware of, oh my God, this thing is hemorrhaging money, and this has to be great. But everybody, the actors and everyone else, you can't think about that. You just have to be there in the moment, on the day, doing your best work. And that's what everybody did. But every time there was a moment, we were all constantly aware of the pressure of this film being what it was and what it needed to be in order to be successful. But without exception, the British crew, you never ever work on anything with a better crew than a British crew. And I worked on lots of films, and they're the best in the world, the best of the best.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's just a sheer professionalism and dedication to craftsmanship. I mean, even if you look at this scene in the small bill section where we were at the father's funeral, Pa Kent's funeral, Jonathan Kent's funeral, and every tombstone had to be individually crafted. That entire graveyard had to be made. Every one of those tombstones was carved out of styrofoam and aged and painted. The church in the background is only about 12 feet tall because it's perspective, and it's only 2/3 of an angle. And just every little detail, when you look at that wide shot, the crane shot of the funeral and the graveyard and the church and the location, and all that has to come together at the hands of so many craftsmen and so much dedication. And I'm sure, like when I worked on MacGyver, the last couple of, I guess it was the last season, I worked on it for 3 seasons in Canada. And then the last season, they moved the show back to Hollywood. And I talked to one of the directors and after the fact, and he referred to the Hollywood crew as the paid assassins. Because they just know they've just got another gig around the corner. Well, I'm working on this piece of shit today, and I'm working on that piece of shit tomorrow. And they just don't seem to care. Whereas you never, ever got a sense of that from any of the British people working on the crew. They were delightful to work with. They were great with each other, and just always professional.
And I saw on a Kate Wonder website, katewonder.com, Jim Bowers, the wonderful work that he does. So some of your photographs, I think, are on his website,
you can probably see the
you
church
photograph
there.
some of the you photograph some of the tombstones and things that obviously people would not really have otherwise,
including my name. Like I had a lovely grave right beside the fence by the gate, because they use crew members' names on the tombstones, so that they didn't have to clear the names through legal channels.
Right.
So we all had a nice little grave in the Smallville cemetery.
Yeah. Oh yes, a nice thing for them to do, isn't it? In a weird,
well, practical and weird.
Yes, I imagine it would have been. Do you remember any of the cast members? So I was thinking of Phyllis Thaxter and Glenn Ford. Did you count them?
Phyllis was lovely. Glenn Ford was a pain in the ass.
Right.
He was drunk a lot. Honestly, he was very unpleasant. I can't remember why, but for some reason, flying into Canada, there was some issue. And so he and Phyllis Thaxter had to be flown into Montana, the nearest state, Great Falls, and they sent a limo down for them to drive them to Calgary. And the limo was there, and Glenn Ford said, "This is my ride." And he left her at the airport. And they had to send a whole other limo, 400 miles to pick her up, and just left her sitting there.
Right. Oh dear.
He, when I was taking him up to the office, the weird thing is I knew how much he was drinking because I would get a call from him to ask me to buy him bottles of vodka because I was his office PA.
Yeah.
And but they wanted him to wear a wig when he was in the film. And when I was bringing him up to the office one time, I picked him up in the car. And it was the one nice experience. I never had personally bad experiences with him, but this was a fun one where he had this wig and he didn't want to wear it and he was carrying it. And we were in the elevator going up to the office and he put the wig on in the elevator and said, "Do you think this looks stupid? I'm not going to wear this stupid fucking thing." And it was just a very funny experience to have with this legendary Hollywood actor.
Yeah.
Talking about whether he should wear a wig or not. But this is the weird things you get to do. One of the nicest things, I got to chat with Noel Neal,
Oh, right.
who and Kirk Allen, who were the original Lois Lane and Superman from the radio and TV days.
Mm.
And Noel was absolutely lovely. She just has that brief cameo in the train car, where Lois Lane, you have a writer's imagination.
Yeah.
With the young Lois. And she was absolutely lovely. And I talked with her about George Reeve, the TV Superman, who they made a whole movie about whether he was murdered or not. And I asked her what she thought, and she was absolutely certain he was murdered.
Right.
She knew him very well. And she said there's absolutely no way in the world he would ever have shot himself.
It seemed very odd because we had another series who was going to do more involvement behind the scenes, and it seemed odd.
But then, but that was the controversy, of course, and still is to this day. But it was nice to be able to spend enough time with her and chat that I could ask her that question. I didn't know who Kirk Allen was as much, so I didn't talk to him as much. I didn't realize how significant he was at the time, but of course I grew up, she was Lois Lane for me, watching the old TV shows when I was tying a towel around my neck and jumping off the couch.
And what did they think about this movie of Superman?
Oh, they were thrilled, of course. I mean, it was thrilling for them to be a part of it. And she's one of those, classic Hollywood character actors who you could just, she was part of the studio system, and I'm sure she had every one of these people has so many stories, and I hope, and there's just so many of the people, even, I'm 67 now, but when I was a kid, like 20 working on that film, they were people who had worked since the 30s and 40s. And so they had the whole history of Hollywood in their experience in the studio system. And I used to love just chatting with all of those folks. One of my favorite people I talked with on MacGyver was Walter Gotell, who played a lot of the Russian generals and stuff in the Bond films. And the story he had, my wife and I had him over for dinner, and he got so hammered he just slept on the couch. But it's very interesting to have a Bond villain sleeping on your couch.
Yeah, it doesn't happen every day, does it?
No. But these people, they just love to talk, and they're 9 times out of 10, I've very, very rarely met. Like I worked on, like I say, on Altman film with Paul Newman and things like that, and And literally, the bigger they are, the nicer they are.
Hmm.
I only talked to Gene Hackman a couple of times on the film, only because of, as necessary. And he was always very pleasant and very professional. And Ned Beatty was a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
If you look through the photos that are from the website, there's one, I think it's a black and white one of a three-legged race they were playing during lunchtime during the missile convoy stuff with Larry Hagman and Ned Beatty, just all hanging out and just having fun together.
Oh, lovely. Yeah.
Larry Hagman was lovely too.
Because I think he was he knew Richard Donner quite well. I think that's why he was in the film, I believe.
Yeah, they're old buddies. And Donner, his TV career was already phenomenal. I mean, he directed so many classic Twilight Zone episodes, and like he directed a couple of the real classic Shatner ones, like The Nightmare at 20,000 feet or whatever the mileage is.
Oh,
the one with the creature on the wing. Yeah,
yeah.
He directed that one.
Yeah,
and a number of other really classic Twilight Zones.
And Man from Uncle, the original black and white first series, he did.
Yeah,
it was there in the early days of the show, sort of.
Oh yeah,
together.
well, all these guys. When you look, I teach a class in TV history at the film school where I teach, and just the all of the really great directors who got their start in television, even before that period, of Sidney Lumet and Arthur Penn and Sam Peckinpah, they all got their start in 60s TV, mostly making westerns.
Yeah. And did you have much to do with the logistics of the missile convoy scenes, with getting the big motorhome and all that sort of stuff?
I don't know if I heard to say I personally had. I think I'm kind of witness to history more than a participant in it, but certainly controlling the traffic when we were shooting the missile convoys. And it was a huge logistical thing to have all those vehicles. And there's one of the photos you'll see that I gave to the website is the missile convoy. We actually only had one missile, but there was the Army missile and the Navy missile. And the Navy missile was gray. And so what we did is we had the one missile that was painted, I guess, brown for the Army. And we shot all of that stuff in all the vehicles. And there was a spray-on latex paint that was on the missile and on the vehicles. So we didn't have to have duplicates of these giant props. But then it took a whole day, which we didn't anticipate, to get the damn paint off. And so there's one of the photos shows the missile where it's part gray and part brown, as we were trying to scrub off all of the latex paint to reveal the permanent paint underneath of the brown color. That's just a little detail thing.
Oh yeah, all the things that happen you don't necessarily foresee happening. Yeah.
But when you've got a movie that's costing probably a minimum of $100,000 a day, and you've saved money with paint, it was probably even cheaper to build another missile.
Is it quite common? Sorry, go on, Rick. Sorry. Did you want to add anything else on that particular bit?
No.
So I was just thinking, is it common for producers to be on location?
Oh, of course.
But I suppose because that's where the money goes, isn't it?
Yeah, at certain levels. I mean, there's producers and there's producers. There are executive producers who are very often just money people or people who are at a high end in the company who's making the film. But then there's the line producers and the associate producers who are the hands-on people who are in charge of budget and logistics and decision making at the ground level. Do we reschedule? Do we do this? Do we do that? So there are producers who are money people. There are producers who are exclusively creative people. There are people who have producer credits in lieu of money. Like they would make more money, but we'll give you a producer credit. And it's a currency that any company can spend by giving a credit. And so that's why you see extraordinary number of people called producers on films, and that's why it's an issue within the Film Academy, where fairly recently they changed the rules of who actually qualifies as a producer in terms of like a Best Picture, who gets their name on an Oscar. They can't give it to 50 different people who call themselves producers. So they have actually, I wouldn't call it a struggle, but they have made a point of defining, okay, what is an actual producer, the person who made the film. And in the case of Superman with Salkin and Spangler, it was made in spite of them, not because of them.
Yes, yes. I was wondering, did you meet Valerie Perrine?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
She was absolutely, I'm still in touch with her on Facebook.
Oh, good, good.
Of course, you know, she's struggling with her health now.
Parkinson's, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah. But I send her a note every now and then. She always responds. She was absolutely lovely. I mean, she was even more gorgeous in person, if you can imagine.
Right. Yeah.
But very professional, very sweet, no ego whatsoever. I can still have visions of her in that dress that she wore in the missile sequence, where she's supposed to be the femme fatale, tricking them by being in distress. Anyway, no, she was very, very nice.
Oh yeah, and I've communicated with her via email through her agent, assistant, and I've done a couple of Superman events in the past. Although, of course, she hasn't been able to do a visual appearance. She has sent me notes to read out about memories on the film.
Yeah, so she can't physically do that.
No, but she wants to be involved, and that's
yeah.
I think
like I was watching. It was a couple of months ago. I watched Slaughterhouse-5 again for the first time in a long time, and she's so great and so sexy in that, but in a way that's like sometimes you get a sense of, especially in those 70s films where the nudity and stuff can be very exploitive. But because of her comfort level and because of who her character was and the toplessness and stuff, and it's awkward. I find it kind of weird when you've met somebody and know somebody and then you see them naked in a movie. It's a little weird. It's like seeing a relative or something. But she was so funny and sexy in such a playful, kittenish way in that film, and she's so good in it, in a role that would have otherwise been kind of borderline sleazy, but because of her personality and because of how she handled it. And anyway, I sent her a note just to say that, and she wrote back within a day and said that, just shared a little bit, and so she's very, it's I can't imagine being as sharp as she clearly still is mentally, but to have the physical limitations of the Parkinson's must be beyond heartbreaking. But she's very, very sharp still, and I'm really thrilled I reconnected with her through Jim, and I'm really, really pleased that I did.
Oh yeah, it's fantastic too. Because I think when you're on a film, it's a very sort of intense period of time you're with people, and then suddenly it's over and you would need. So it's kind
of like joining the circus, except when you're working on a film like that as a location person, it's like the circus comes to town and leaves, and then you wait for the next circus to arrive. But sometimes, like there's a lot of people I've stayed in touch with over the different productions I've worked on over the years, either as a writer or as an AD. People that I've stayed in touch with for decades.
You mentioned Tom Mankiewicz earlier being always on set as a because of course you were a prospective writer at that time. So were you tempted to talk to Tom about writing, or
I was tempted to, but I didn't.
No,
because you just don't. You
No,
know,
no, I suppose it's
it's
not
it,
the
and the weird thing is too, it's like I'm glad that I took the photos that I did, but we weren't supposed to be taking photos, of course.
Yeah.
But I wasn't taking them for publication. But because it was a top secret production. But there's a lot of movies that I've worked on. I kind of kick myself that I don't have more photos. But in those days, you had to have a bulky camera with you.
Yeah.
You couldn't just take a picture with your phone discreetly at any given time. And so I had this little tiny camera. It was almost like a spy camera. It wasn't a spy camera, of course. I think it was a 110. And so that's why a lot of the photos that I do have are not that great, because it was a very tiny negative. But then some of the photos that I gave Jim were just photos that were taken by Bruno Engler and different set photographers at the time. And I just got copies of those pictures that I kept.
Right. So what would you have had talked to the set photographers? Would you kind of got to know them a little bit? Yeah.
A little bit, yeah. Yeah, because everybody, that's the neat thing again about being in the office, is you're just kind of talking with everybody all the time, both purposefully and by opportunity.
Did you have any memories? Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was wondering if you had any memories of Stuart Freeborn in terms of what he was like as a person.
He was lovely. I mean, everybody was. I haven't got a bad thing. I wish I could tell you some dirt, but other than the producers, literally everybody was great. And I was interested, ironically, I don't know if it's ironic, but I was interested in makeup long before I was interested in being a screenwriter. And so I chatted with Stuart quite a bit about 2001, and he even put a prosthetic cut on my nose so I could see what a prosthetic felt like. And it was lovely. I mean, everybody was generous as can be with their time.
Yeah.
Yvonne Blake even took me shopping for a shirt one time when I was taking her out to buy stuff for the film. And I said, what do you think I should wear? And so we poked around a couple of stores, and she picked out a couple of shirts that she thought would be good for me. It's nice to have an Oscar-winning costume designer help pick out your shirt.
Well,
I kept that shirt for a long time, but my wife didn't like it, so I got rid of it.
Oh dear. Well, we'll forgive her for that.
Well, it was dated. It was a 70s thing.
Yeah. I think, I suppose that Superman does have a timeless quality to it, but there are perhaps certain things that does date it, but not.
Yeah, it's of its time.
Yeah.
Like anything else. The other weird encounter, entirely unrelated to the shoot, was I ran into Jackie Cooper when I was at Paramount for a meeting, and he was in the commissary. And I thought, well, when am I going to get another chance to meet Jackie Cooper? So the weird thing is, when you're in a studio environment, it's not a fan zone. Everybody there is professional, and so you don't generally do touristy kind of fan things. But I just when it was convenient, I just said hello to him, and I said, you don't know this, but we both worked on the same movie, and it's a great honor to meet you, because of course he's legendary. And he was really, really nice. And we talked a little bit about Superman, but he was really nice.
Oh, good. Well, wonderful. Did you have any other memories of Ned Beatty or Ole Hangman?
Just that mostly about Ned was that he was very quiet. He was very soft-spoken. Obviously, nothing like the Luther Dopey character. If anything, he was extraordinarily intelligent. I remember one time when you're a PA, sometimes just like driving the car into position, you'll walk an actor into a off-camera position before a take, and then they signal you on the radio, and then you cue the actor to go. And so there was a couple of moments like that where I had to walk Ned up into this area far from camera, So we were just hanging out waiting for the signal for the take. And he was just looking at the different plants in the area, and he knew like Latin names of different plants. He was really into, and it was just such an interesting contrast to the goofiness of his character. But he was very quiet, very, very soft spoken. That was my memory of him.
And did I read somewhere that Larry Hagman took an interest in your glasses?
Yeah, that one picture in the that I sent to the website. I was talking with him, and I had my camera, and I said, "Can I take a picture of you?" And he said, "Yeah, sure." And he just grabbed my glasses and put my glasses on when I took his photo, which was just funny.
You mentioned Norman Reynolds. Do you have any particular memories of Norman?
Not specifically. I just remember him and Les Dilly very specifically being very diligent and very enthusiastic. There was a real, whenever I was in the art department, there was a real energy. It was one of the places I liked to go and have to visit if I needed to, with all of the drawings and the photos and just the sheer creative energy of the art department. And they're just lovely, lovely guys, just really pleasant and just, I always got a sense, and I think this is unique to the British crews as well, is everybody was having fun. It was, no matter the pressure, people were truly loved what they did, and they were proud of the work they were doing. And it was never a job, my sense of it. Like on other crews and Hollywood crews I've worked with, like for example on Days of Heaven, it was a very problematic shoot, famously so. And we shot so much stuff that we didn't need, and the director didn't know what he wanted. It came out well, and it won an Oscar for cinematography, but the crew was miserable the whole time. And that got in the way of the film, I think. I don't think it helped that they didn't like the director. But mind you, this director was not, Terry Malick is not Richard Donner. And so much of the same thing when I worked on the Altman film, it was like a party, because Altman creates this party-like atmosphere. But I also didn't get a sense that Altman had a clue what he wanted. Whereas Donner was always very specific. He knew exactly what he wanted. And he had this crew of people who would help him get exactly what he wanted. And he was always very precise and knew what he wanted to achieve, knew what every shot was, knew what every frame was. Whereas a lot of directors, and there's room for that, to be experimental, but like on a film like Days of Heaven, you should actually check it out. It's a beautiful film. But it was crazy. It was nightmarish to make. There's a scene where the fields burn up because there's a fire scene at the end of the film, and the effects guy sprayed the entire field with diesel fuel, which was unnecessary. And we were supposed to shoot pieces of the field on fire over successive nights, but the entire thing went up and we almost burned up. But when you see the film, it's like huge walls of flame. If you just Google on YouTube, Days of Heaven fire, you'll see these fires were out of control. Looked fantastic in the movie, but it just killed everybody.
Yeah.
But that wouldn't happen on Superman, because Terry didn't know what he wanted, and Donner did.
Yeah.
And that's a huge difference. And that's, of all the films I've worked on and the TV shows I've worked on, the one job a director needs to have in his head is, what do I want? And how can I get it? And then you're surrounded with the actors and crew and everyone who will help you achieve that. But if a director is purely experimental and you're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars of other people's money every day, I just think it's ultimately irresponsible.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think what makes Superman such a great film is that Richard Donner believed in what he was doing. He knew
Absolutely.
and that's I don't think anybody
And
else
it
could
was
have done
his,
with the film.
there would not, the entire legacy of Superman in the films that evolved from the first one never, ever, ever would have happened without Donner at the helm of the first film,
Yeah.
unquestionably.
Hmm.
And not just put anything down on Richard Lester, but he was a different kind of filmmaker.
He was, yeah. It was very
And
much.
Richard Lester made great Richard Lester films.
Hmm.
But I'm not, I wasn't fond of the subsequent films for the most part. I didn't like the forced comic tone. I think the balance of drama and comedy and the touch of just that balance of comic book and reality that Donner
Yeah.
brought to the first
Hmm.
film is what made it purely magical. And I think once it got to be like a Richard Pryor vehicle and things like that, I just think it got further and further and further away from both the original comic books and they just became, how can we make money with this?
Yeah. I think two was a bit of a mess because you had two different directing styles, and no matter what cut you got, there's problems with every one of them. And three of
Yeah.
them, once they knew that Richard Pryor wanted to be in the film, it was so it wasn't. I don't think Richard Lester
And
would
it
have.
becomes a Richard, then it becomes a Richard Pryor movie and not a Superman movie. And that's fine as a Richard Pryor movie, but
Yeah,
then make a Richard Pryor movie.
yeah. I know exactly what you mean. I was just wondering because you were shooting for 7 or 8 weeks. Did you ever have any weather problems or any sort of issues from
Oh,
that point of
yes,
view?
huge. In
Hmm.
fact, if you read the Making of Superman book, I think one of the chapters is Canada Dry is only a soft drink. And so you had a tremendous amount of rain
Hmm.
uh, intermittently, and that became a real problem.
But you
But
still need it.
and it was an unusual amount of rain because ordinarily Alberta is actually a high altitude desert. Because the altitude is 3,000 to 4,000 feet.
Yeah,
It's very high altitude. Of course, we're right on the brink of the Rockies,
yeah.
and so we don't generally get nearly that much rain. But we certainly did that summer.
Yeah. So even with the rain, you still need things like the water trucks to keep the dust down and
Well, that was in the
cameras.
particularly deserty area near
Hmm.
Drumheller, and that was a very dry, particularly
Yeah.
desert area. It's a really cool area if you ever get to Canada. We have world-class dinosaur museum in Drumheller.
Yeah.
That's actually, I think the Queen actually dedicated it. I
Oh,
mean,
right.
I think it's called the Royal Terrell Museum or something, but it's one of the best dinosaur museums in the world
Oh,
because it's
sounds
a
sounds
big
good.
dinosaur area
Yeah.
around.
Oh, yeah. Sounds worth a visit. Am I correct in that the location for the farmhouse was partly dictated because of the need for the wheat fields, and I think it was a bit late in the
Oh, sure.
season, so that
It
did that
was,
make a
yeah.
bit of a nightmare?
I don't know if it was a nightmare, but I honestly don't remember because some of those choices were made before I came on board
Hmm.
because that was like early location scouts
Yeah.
and choices like that. Because by the time I saw the farm, the art department had completely done it inside and out to be
Hmm.
the Kent farm.
Hmm.
But all the early, like those location scouts take place months before
Hmm.
we're in pre-production.
Hmm.
So no, I'm not 100% tuned in on that. But of course, it makes sense because there's the scene where he's running through the wheat field. There's, it's part of the whole reason for shooting in Alberta was
Yeah.
to get the wheat fields and that's one of the great things about shooting in the Calgary area is from that one central location we could go to Drumheller and get the desert stuff. We could go to the mountains and get the convoy stuff, and we could go to the south around Barrens and and get the farm and the high school. And so the range of locations within Calgary as a central hub. That's one of the reasons, even still, why it's a very popular shooting location.
And of course, cheaper
And,
than shooting in America and
well,
in
plus,
New York,
yeah, the
etc.
Canadian dollar doesn't hurt. I mean, the TV series The Last of Us shot entirely in Alberta.
Hmm.
Around Edmonton and Calgary,
Yeah.
for the same reason, because they could get that range. And they also get, the Calgary crews are really, really good because they work a lot on different shows and movies that come into town. The Fargo TV series is shot up, except for one season, entirely in Calgary and around there. So it's still a very popular. Vancouver and Calgary are the two biggest shooting regions in Canada, even more so than Toronto.
And I take it the Canadian film industry has progressed massively since the 70s. What was it like in the 70s? Was it kind of sort of finding its feet?
No, it was when I first started right out of high school, it was like the mid 70s. But there had already been a number of films shot around Calgary.
Yeah.
A Western called Little Big Man. There's all kinds of them, but more so, it really, really kicked into gear from the mid 70s into the 80s, where Silver Streak, Gene Wilder, Richard Pryor film, was shot around Calgary. Not necessarily the entire film, but certain sections that were appropriate for the location and for budget reasons. But the problem with the Canadian film industry is we're almost entirely a backlot. We don't have anywhere close to the amount of Indigenous Canadian production that would keep our crews working right now. With the actors and writers on strike in Hollywood, Vancouver is a ghost town for production, because even though we have a great many studio spaces and really top-notch crews, we don't make Canadian programming or movies. And we're entirely dependent on Americans coming to town and shooting their stuff here with our low dollar and great crews. Why wouldn't they? But that doesn't support local people when the Americans leave town, and that's always been a problem.
Oh yeah, because Superman, of course, comes back for 2 and 3, but as you say, they shoot their stuff, location, and go back to England to finish it off.
And obviously the UK has a tremendous film industry, but you still have, the Hollywood people coming to use Pinewood and Elstree and everywhere else.
It's very, very American skewed, particularly Pinewood, and of course with the writer's strike, because it's mostly American Disney productions, because Disney have the long-term lease on Pinewood.
Oh yeah,
it's completely shut down over here as much as it is, your side of the world. So and
it's a shame, because I don't have to tell you how great the British film industry is, and the tremendous contributions that has been made from Elstree and or the Ealing films, or the Powell and Pressburger. And I just was watching Matter of Life and Death again last night, and just the Powell and Pressburger films are phenomenal, and I don't think they get nearly the attention that they should still be getting.
Yeah. Do you see an easy end to this writer strike and the actor strike?
I honestly don't. I think it's an absolute do or die crossroads of the industry right now, and because I honestly don't know what the answer is. You can't, in terms of the issues of the Writers Guild, AI aside, which is a whole other thing, you can't force anybody to make more episodes than they want to make. You can't force people to say you have to have X number of people in a writer's room. But the biggest issue, I think, that is resolvable, whether there's any will to resolve it remains to be seen, is around the scale of payment of royalties. Because I've written over 100 TV shows, and I still get a few $1,000s a year out of stuff I don't even remember writing. I'll get little bits and pieces, but if you've got $7.50 from 100 different sources, then it's $750. But what's happening with the Netflix or any of the streamers is they will buy a show and they will own the show, and then instantly, say Stranger Things, it's instantly globally distributed. And so there's no second market. What streaming has done is it's completely evaporated the syndication market, which is where all that secondary income used to come from for actors and writers.
Hmm.
And so if your show is already all over the world and there's no physical media anymore, nobody's selling DVDs of stuff. And so these marketplaces have been completely eliminated by the streamers.
Hmm.
And by the consumers, because this is now how we watch TV
Yeah.
and films. And so when there's like, plus the expense of what they're spending, like Stranger Things, $30 million an episode. Where do you make the money back? So, Amazon, they've got more money than God, and so they spend $500 million on the Lord of the Rings series that nobody likes.
You've got to think, how can these things cost that amount of money?
Well, that and a lot of it is rights fees and stuff like that, but also they're just extraordinarily expensive to make, and they take a lot of time, and so you get fewer episodes made over a longer period of time, and then there's like an 18-month gap in between seasons, and then people binge it and it's gone again in 2 weeks. And there's no secondary market because it's all, and so where do you ever get the money back? And so as a result, the streamer's entire model is based on market share, not on viewing. And that's why you see perfectly good, successful shows on Netflix canceled after 2-3 seasons, because they don't want a successful show that costs them progressively more to make every year as people ask for more money to come back. They want the new show that will bring in new subscribers.
Yeah.
And so it becomes a lost leader for them to do a 4th season of a popular show, where that will cost them 3 times as much as doing a 1st season of a new show. And because everything is based on market share, their entire model of financing is bringing in new subscribers, not keeping existing subscribers. It's bringing in new ones.
Yeah.
And so everything, it's like a car showroom that only has this year's model every 2 weeks. But then suddenly you've got a parking lot full of cars that are only a few years old that nobody wants, because everybody wants the new shiny one.
Right. Yeah.
And plus the entire promotional model goes out the window, because everything, rather than it being about promoting something that's coming, it's about creating a social media environment where everybody is clicking and buzzing about the current thing. And then everybody wants to see it first because they don't want it spoiled, and then it's binged, and then it's gone.
Yeah.
And I don't know how you fix that, because they've created their own monster.
Yeah, so much, it's all disposable, isn't it, now these days? There's so much
Everything's
competition,
disposable.
next new thing. There's no sort of sense of building something up, nurturing, developing over seasons.
And the other thing that comes out of that too is that the model for writers learning their craft is also evaporating. Because like I described that one writer student who got on Bates Motel, her experience evolved because that show lasted 3 or 4 years, and she could create those relationships. And then, but then if a show is only going to do 8 episodes every 2 years, and all of the writing is done before the show goes into production, it just, the whole model again is skewed, because there's no apprenticeship space for a new writer to enter into that. Because they'll have a showrunner, and the showrunner will write maybe half the episodes, and then the other 4 will be written by other writers, and they'll all get together for a very short period of time in a writer's room and binge outline the episodes. And then so the entire writing process would be over in 2 months. And then the show goes on, and then it goes away. And then it's a year later when they say whether they want more or not. Because everything before was based on the network model of 22 episodes a year. And now that just almost nothing happens like that anymore.
No, even big shows like Game of Thrones, it was 8 episodes towards the end. It's 10. The
Don't get
UK
me
never
started.
produced.
Don't get me started on how bad Game of Thrones got.
Yeah, and because you were saying when you're on things like MacGyver, it's a 20-odd episode you're doing, and you're pretty much on from start to finish, I assume.
Yeah, exactly. And like even before we were renewed, the studio would give us a 6-episode script order, just in anticipation of getting renewed.
Right. Yeah.
And so there was a different kind of commitment to what a show was and what it could be. And now it's just the entire model is broken, and it has to be fixed from the top down.
Yeah,
it can't be fixed from the bottom up. It's a decision that has to be made by the money people and the studios and the networks and the streamers, and they all have to be able to take a look at what they're giving to people and what people are watching. But this is also consumer driven. We are making these decisions to binge things and to say, okay, what's next, because that's how we've been fed. But the generation that I grew up with, that's not how TV worked. The only reason there's a fall season in the States is because that's when the new cars came out.
Oh, yeah.
Everything in the original days of television, the networks did not own the shows. They're entirely owned by the sponsors. That's why you get what soap operas were called soap operas, because they're owned by the soap companies. There was the Colgate Comedy Hour. There was the United Steel Drama Hour. There was Philco presents this, Frigidaire presents that. If you look at the kinescopes of any of the old TV shows, they all have products plastered all over them because they were literally owned by. That's what drove Rod Serling to move to Hollywood and create the Twilight Zone, is because when he was writing live TV, which he won multiple Emmys for, they're entirely owned by the sponsor, and so the sponsor had all the creative control, and so he couldn't take on topical, important issues because sponsors didn't want to be part of that message. And so that's why he pushed himself into the fantasy genre, because that's the only place he could say what he wanted to say in an abstract way.
Yes, it's absolutely fascinating. And in terms of how did you get into writing? Did you start a spec script, or how did you kind of get your first script?
I'd written a couple of screenplays in high school, and then I moved to Vancouver, which is where there was no Canadian production shooting in Calgary, but there were 2 or 3 shows shooting in Vancouver, and so I moved here. And because of I think it was interesting that I had this film background, and I learned a lot being an AD, made me a much better writer. And I wrote a spec comedy, American comedy, that got me a job on a Canadian sitcom, and I was a staff writer on that, and I had written a number of local Canadian shows that shot in Vancouver, written sketch comedy and family adventure shows that were shooting here for the Canadian networks. And then when there was a show called Airwolf, they did a really shitty last season of Airwolf that we shot. That was, we had to do it without the helicopter.
Dear.
Because they needed, and this is the other thing too, is with the syndication market, one of the reasons they would pump out 22 episodes a year is in order for a show to go into syndication, global syndication, you needed to have at least 100 episodes. And so that's not the case anymore. And so with Airwolf, the star of the show had become so problematic they couldn't work with him anymore. Jan Michael Vincent, Jan Michael Vodka, as they called him, sadly. And but they needed more Airwolf episodes without him. And so they decided to make the cheapest possible version of a 4th season by coming to Canada to shoot it and not have a helicopter, we had the helicopter that sat in the cave, but then we just had to use stock footage of the helicopter flying and say, we landed over there. It was dumb. But we did the best we could with it. But because I was writing that show here, they were looking for one local writer to work on MacGyver, just to do very minimal location change writing. Nothing, episodes, no actual writing, just like go on the location surveys and rewrite for production. And because of my production background and action adventure background, I got that job. But then within a few weeks, the exec producer said, just rewrite this one act for me. And I did. And he phoned me at home and said, because it was on a weekend, and I left it for him, and he phoned me at home and said, thanks for giving me the day off. I don't have to do anything with this. And then they made me a full writer on the show and gave me an assignment. And within the third year that I was on the show, there were no writers in Hollywood, all Canadian writers, but one American living in Canada, writing an American network show. All local writers, because the talent is here. But we don't make enough Canadian television to employ Canadian writers. And you can't work in Vancouver as a Canadian TV writer. You have to move to Toronto.
Right.
But few shows we make are made there. And Canadian networks see Canadian television as a penalty they have to pay for buying American television. So it's very, very difficult.
Did you remember working on the writing a Police Academy TV series?
Yes. Yeah, I'm good friends with Paul Maslansky, who created the movies as a producer. It was his idea, and he developed them all. Lovely, lovely guy. And I'd worked with him when I was an AD on a movie that he did, and we stayed good friends. And so when he came to Vancouver to do the dubious Police Academy TV series, he gave me an episode to write, and that was fun.
I mentioned that because the director of the episode recently passed away, a guy called Raymond Austin, and we did a lot of these kind of events together, and we became quite close. So when I saw your name on, I thought might as well should ask you about that. So
yeah, no, I never met him. It was kind of a gift from Paul to write the episode, and I was on set very briefly when they were shooting it.
Yeah.
But it was just the one episode, so I wasn't involved like I was on other shows as a producer and writer on the series.
Did you recall being happy with the result?
No. It was not a good idea for a series. Honestly, I think it would have been. Yeah, I just never gelled.
Yeah,
I think, and it's the Police Academy. Paul is still, he's in his 80s now. He's still very vibrant and trying to get another Police Academy movie going.
Yeah,
and I wouldn't be surprised if he does it. But he's just one of those guys who is like very much a journeyman producer, the kind of guy I'm talking about, who's like a line producer who knew where to spend the money and knew what to do. And if you look at Paul Maslansky, and the range of his career is phenomenal, of the really, really broad range of good stuff that he's done, other than Police Academy. And Police Academy was just a comedy that hit and made him a multimillionaire.
Well, yeah, I mean, some of them are really great, like any series. There's a few that aren't, but I know there has been a rumor of a number 8 for a while, and maybe about 10 years ago, when you had some of the elderly cast still around, then it may have made sense. But perhaps now it's a bit like Lethal Weapon 5. Maybe best not to make an Lethal Weapon because it's
it becomes if there's no more story to tell, if you're just cashing in on the name, audiences smell that coming, and they're not. And there's just so much stuff that you can watch now.
Yeah,
that the competition for what you see is entirely different. It's like I tell my students, the fact that today you can watch what you want, where you want, when you want, is nothing like, I'm old. I remember when there was no home video. And if even the TV shows that I was writing in the 80s and 90s and 2000s, but more so in the 80s. Like if MacGyver was on in like 86, 87, you didn't have a VCR. And if you missed it, you had to wait for the rerun. And it just went away. TV was like on flash paper. It just disappeared. And if a show didn't make enough episodes and didn't go into syndication, then it just vanished from existence.
Yeah.
And now, like I remember, this is a goofy reference. There was an old TV show, I remember it as a kid, about astronauts going back in time, called It's About Time. And it was just a dumb early Sherwood Schwartz series, the guy who did the Brady Bunch and stuff later. And then the second season, the cavemen came to the present with the astronauts. But I just remember it as a nostalgic thing. But the whole thing is out on DVD. But it's something that I haven't seen in 50 years.
Yeah.
But it's there and accessible because of the home video market. And so there's all these things, and it's a weird kind of irony that we can get stuff like that, but streaming stuff just is now almost the equivalent of the old network TV. Disney recently has been taking their original series off of their channel, and it just goes away. And so there's no other way to see it. With the streamers decide not to renew or even air stuff that they produced as original, it's just gone because there is no other market for it. Netflix isn't going to sell their show that they spent an absurd amount of money on, that they only made 13 episodes of, or 26 or 10, into a syndication market that doesn't exist. And so that's what the whole model is completely changed. And that's why everybody's on strike, because they've created an overpriced, impossible, unsustainable model.
Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a real nightmare to solve such a difficult position, really.
Yeah, I have no idea how they're going to fix it.
One promising thing I did hear Disney announce is they're releasing some of their original stuff, like Mandalorian, Loki, on DVD is coming out.
Oh, that's good.
So but then again, as Disney have pulled out of physical media in Australia, so it's kind of a mixed message of what's kind of going to happen with that. But you're right. If it's you buy a movie on Amazon, but then they suddenly lose the rights to it, or the studio that produces it changes it, even though you bought it goes away. Yeah.
And all you ever buy when you buy digital media is the right to watch it. You don't physically own it. You've paid a license fee to watch it when you want to watch it, but you can't download it, and you can't.
Yeah.
I mean, some you can, but not all of it, and that's why there's such a black market in this stuff for people who torrent things and save stuff. I have a lot of foreign students from Mexico and different countries, and they have every bit of software, and they know every little hidden website to find stuff. And unfortunately, the studios and the producers have done that to themselves because they haven't created a viable marketplace to have access to this stuff, and so it goes underground, and people who want it get it that way.
I think that may be a reason behind Disney releasing some of their stuff on physically, because there is this piracy element, and they're thinking, well, we should be getting the money, and we're going to do it that way.
Yeah.
But
when there's stuff that I don't have copies of my own work that I can watch on YouTube.
Yeah.
Fortunately. But there's stuff that I never got tapes of or anything in the day that I've never seen again. That's why suddenly I'll get, $1.95 for Beastmaster in Bulgaria. Oh, I forgot I wrote Beastmaster or Mutant X, or the odd shows that I did just a few episodes of.
Yeah. Just to wrap up our lovely chat, just going back to Superman for a moment. Amazon did have for quite a while, as did some streaming platforms, a variant of the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2 that you might have been aware of. It was the original put together before it was then cut down a little bit for home release, and somehow it got on streaming services.
Was that like the TV version? Because they did a version for network TV.
Yeah, there was lots of TV versions, wasn't there, in the 70s and 80s. This was I think the first intentional cut for the Richard Donner version of Superman 2 that Michael Thor put together, and it had
did they call it the Donner cut or something like that?
Yeah, so this would actually become the Donner cut, but there was like an extended Donner cut put together, and it had some more of Lester's scenes, and that actually, interestingly, some more of Gene Hackman and a very, very small bit of Marlon Brando that's not in the final. So there was more Donner footage, and it only available on streaming. And since they brought out the 4Ks, that version is now gone. So that's another.
It's like George Lucas fucking with the original Star Wars, and creating a huge market for the original releases. I still have my laser disc of Star Wars.
I've still got some of the videos myself. Yes, yeah. I mean, I don't know. I suppose that because the first Star Wars film, we don't worry too much about that because George Lucas wrote and directed it, but the other two had different directors, and you'd think you're messing with what I've done here. It's just, I don't know whether they ever felt like that, but
but I think that's just. I think all you have to do is look at the following trilogy and realize that he kind of lost his way.
Oh, yes, definitely.
But you also realize the impact of, one of the great producers of all time was Alan Ladd Jr.
Yes.
And if you look at the influence, there's a documentary about him. I can't remember the name of it. And Paul Maslansky, he knew him very well, called him Laddie. And I think he produced the original Police Academy films too. I may be wrong, but he was somebody he was almost the producer equivalent of Richard Corman. He was somebody who just had this vision and this eye for something, and he would champion the passion of a director or a producer in a way that, as an independent producer, that the studios often wouldn't. And I think that's something, I don't know what the range of your interest is, but really looking into Alan Ladd Jr.'s influence on, especially in the 70s, is tremendous.
Yeah. I think I've talked to Jim Bloom, who's the producer for the first couple of Star Wars films, Empire and Return of the Jedi, and he was saying how much Alan Ladd Jr. was. If it wasn't for him, maybe Star Wars wouldn't have happened. It was very sort of,
especially in the edits and everything like that as well, and in the distribution and I don't remember if he was working at Fox when that was the case, or if he was an independent producer and they ended up at Fox as a distributor after the fact with Star Wars. I don't recall, but I know without his influence, so many great films would never have gotten made, let alone made well.
Oh yeah. One common denominator for Star Wars and Superman was John Barry, the production designer. I assume he was never around with you. He would be probably back at Pinewood and on location.
I think he was there at the very beginning when we were first in pre-production. I don't believe he was there through production because he was busy building stuff at Pinewood and doing stuff. I remember him being around, but I don't remember him as. It would have been very early days during pre-production, but primarily it was Norm and Les Dilly and people like that who were the hands-on people during production in Canada.
How much leeway time did you have between the pre-production and then coming to start shooting?
Geez, I think we probably started prep in May or June, at least 2 months or more, probably longer when I was involved. But I would say the offices and the actual getting locations and getting hiring crew and everything probably would have started in certainly no later than April or May, from the original location scouts and stuff into, well, I think I got involved in May, and then we didn't start shooting till July, August. I remember for sure, one of the weird reasons I remember the dates is because when we were shooting the Smallville stuff was the day that Elvis died. And that was in August of 77. And I just remember that where we were when we heard Elvis died, and we were shooting the high school stuff for Smallville on that day. But it was because we needed the summer for the desert stuff, obviously, in Drumheller, and for the wheat fields. And then the last stuff we shot was the missile convoy stuff in the mountains.
Do you remember Jeffrey Unsworth at all?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he was wonderful to watch work. And again, I knew who he was, and I wish I had had the courage to chat with him. But, when I wasn't on set all the time. And if I was on set, it was for a purpose. So there wasn't, unless it was lunchtime or something, there really wasn't a lot of time for appropriate conversation. But it was certainly knowing who he was, and he was a legend then and now. So yeah, I remember him being there, and of course, like everyone else, being a total pro. He worked really, really well with Donner, and that's as much as I recall of him.
And also there's a gentleman called Peter McDonald who's still going with the camera operator, and they have a wonderful relationship.
I remember Peter.
And
he was like the key. He was the key operator. As I recall.
I've done a couple of these with Peter, and he's fantastic. He's kind person. And lastly, Jeff East. Did he leave an impression, because it must have been quite physically demanding?
I liked Jeff. I was friends with him on Facebook until recently, when we disagreed about guns in the US. But I like Jeff. It was. I don't know if it's among the photos that I gave to the website, but there's one picture I took of him. It's not very clear because it was in that old camera, but what he looked like, where he had blonde hair, and he looked nothing like Chris Reeve. And the fact that they dubbed Chris Reeve's voice after the fact, it can't help but wonder why they cast him, because he had the wig and the prosthetic nose, and then Christopher Reeve's voice, and just I don't know. It still was a great performance, but I liked him, and I'd seen him in other films at that time, even though he was a child actor in those. But I knew who he was at the time. Certainly a nice guy, very, very pleasant.
I think he was quite surprised himself that he was dubbed. I don't think he necessarily thought that would happen.
Unfortunately, I didn't talk to him after the film came out, but I know that was a shock. And not entirely necessary, as far as I'm concerned. I don't think anybody even noticed.
No, I don't think so. I was interested about all the TV cuts and the extended Blu-rays, that some of his stuff is his voice, because Christopher Reeve didn't dub all of it. Of course, just dubbed the theatrical cut. So you do get to hear his voice from time to time. Yeah,
and you can tell. I mean, it's not like he wasn't a good actor. It was just an odd decision for consistency, I guess.
Well, before I let you go, Rick, I just wanted to ask what your favorite project was in your career, just to just see what you.
Well, obviously, kind of have to say Superman, don't I? But certainly the biggest influence on, it was the really big break to be working on the biggest film in the world at that age, because I was only 19, 20 when we worked on it, and. Days of Heaven was a huge influence, because I became really good friends with Nestor Almendros, who became one of my lifelong friends, and he won an Oscar for his cinematography, and he was Truffaut's cinematographer, and he went on to do Kramer versus Kramer and Sophie's Choice, and all kinds of really big films, and we stayed good friends throughout his life. And Days of Heaven is still a film that. It was one of the few movies that I worked on literally from beginning to end, because even like with Superman, I just worked on those sections of it. But Days of Heaven, I was there from pre-production through production and post, and it was the first film I worked on from beginning to end. And it was like I say, it's a famously hellish production. There's like documentaries about how difficult the film it was. But again, it's also got a huge fan base today. Like there's a Criterion disc of it. It's hugely popular and influential in a lot of people's favorite films. It's in the National Archive in the States. It was like chosen for the National Archive. It's a very big film. And then TV wise, of course, MacGyver was a big deal, but I also liked writing Goosebumps, this kid's show. And I don't know, it's hard to say, but it's just, I've had a tremendous opportunity to early in my, just literally out of high school, instead of going to film school, I worked with Robert Altman and Dick Donner and Terry Malick and just had the best film school in the world for a few years, and then continued on with my writing career.
Did you have any formal writing training, or was it just something
No.
distinctive?
No, like I said, I started writing in high school.
Yeah.
And I was going to be a makeup artist. My dad, when I was 17, let me go to LA for 3 weeks to poke around and see what the career possibilities would be. And I determined that it was too unionized and too difficult to immigrate. And so I figured, well, what can I do to get into the film business? And the one thing I could do was write, because that was something I could do at home in my basement. And make little 8mm films and things, and with my friends, and so the fact that I had, when I go to get a job when these films were shooting, it was like I would bring my screenplays with me, and just in case somebody might want to read them, and just the sheer novelty of some high school kid in a tiny town in southern Alberta writing movies. If they're going to hire anybody to be even working in the office, somebody who had that degree of interest and dedication would be the person who got the job, and that just happened to be me. And then I did the job well and created relationships, and all of these jobs, whether you're an AD or a writer or anything, and it really comes down to personality and working well with people. And that was very true of what I saw with the Superman crew. And they were all people who worked on so many different films together, and they were a unit in and of themselves, dedicated professionals who really cared for each other and liked working together, and had a tremendous work ethic and tremendous talent, and you can't do better than that.
And do you recall seeing the film for the first time? Was that
Oh, yeah, of course. It was, and it was the biggest thing I remember is that it was the longest credits in the history of movies, and I didn't get a credit on it, and it was heartbreaking. I thought of all of the things, especially with every driver's dog got a credit, and I didn't, and I don't know why. And it really always bothered me.
I think there were some people that were cut out of the final film that were in the credits, so it kind of
oh, don't tell me that.
But
that makes it even worse.
Well, they were in the extended versions, but they weren't in the. I think,
and I don't know why it's like even the Days of Heaven that I sweat blood into, and I got like the press kit from it, and my name was in the credits in the press kit, but it wasn't on the film.
Ah,
it's like, give me a break. But then, you get to be a writer, and then you get single card credit. And then I'm also a producer. And so, a lot of the things I worked on, I'll get like, it's not an ego thing. It's just, you were part of something and you want evidence of it.
Well,
and it's heartbreaking when it's not there, especially when you work really hard on it and it's a big part of your life. And it's like, honest, I worked on it. I swear I did. Look, I've got the photos.
And now, of course, the credits are even more extensive, aren't they? So
I know.
I would have thought these days you would have got a credit.
Yeah, now it's like if you watch any of the Disney or Marvel shows, the last 15 minutes is all credits.
Yeah.
Yes, it should be.
Oh yeah. I think everybody should get a mention.
In the Pixar films, they even have a whole page of production babies.
Yes, yes, it is.
So it's like that's the one thing I missed was the credit boat that left without me. But
Yeah.
I still have the memories, which are far more important.
And speaking of credits, am I right that you won an Emmy?
I did indirectly.
Mm.
I did and I did. There's two things I worked on. I wrote an episode called of a Canadian show called Road to Avonlea, and it won an Emmy for best program, best family program. I have to look at my wall here. What was it? Just a second. I got the certificate on my wall here. Outstanding Children's Program. And the director got an Emmy and the producer got an Emmy, and I didn't. And so I wrote to the Academy and said, can I have one too, please? And they said, you can. You have to buy it for $1,500. And the producer has to request it.
Right.
And I said, fine. So I wrote to the producer and he wouldn't write the letter to the Academy.
Oh.
And so I got a certificate suitable for framing. And then I just in the last few years, I was on a writing staff for another kids' scary show called The Haunting Hour. I'm looking at the certificate I got for that. Outstanding writing for a children's series. The writing staff was nominated for an Emmy, so I got that at least.
And what was the name of the first children's show that you got?
It was called Road to Avonlea.
Right. Yeah.
I think it's on. There's actually quite a good episode, I think. There's some things I've written that I don't even like. I've written 5 movies and I only like 2 of them. But that episode I was quite proud of, and it really came together nicely. I think it's on YouTube. If I find the link, I'll send it to you.
Oh, yes, I'd appreciate that. Well, thanks very much, Rick, for giving me so much your time and to talk about
my pleasure.
And,
I hope this was worth your time. I enjoyed their conversation.
Oh, thank you very much. Yeah, it's been lovely. It's been very useful, and been wonderful to chat with you.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see how it all comes together. I would love to hear what John had to say.
Oh yeah, I'll be sure to send it to you. Yes, yeah, we'll do.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks so much.
No,
Let me know if you can be in touch if you have any further questions or if you need anything else.
Oh, that's very kind. Thank you very much. And enjoy the rest of your weekend. And it'd be lovely to meet you.
Right. Have a nice evening. Bye.
Yeah, thank you.